5 chapters into the oldest book ever written, buried between a list of men who lived and a list of men who died, a single name breaks the pattern. The book of Genesis, that sprawling account of beginnings, is not a text that wastes words. It does not linger. It does not sentimentalize. When it tells you a man was born, it tells you in the same breath how old he was when he fathered his first son, how many years he lived after that, and that he died. The formula repeats with the relentless rhythm of a drumbeat. And he lived, and he begat, and he died. Adam lived 930 years, and he died. Seth lived 912 years, and he died. Enosh, Kenan, Mahalalel, and Jared, each one measured out in centuries, each one sealed with the same 3 words, and he died. The drumbeat never falters, never changes, never offers so much as a pause for breath, until it does. Enoch, son of Jared, enters the genealogy in Genesis chapter 5, verse 18, and what happens next has haunted readers for longer than most civilizations have existed. The text does not say that Enoch lived 900 years. It does not even say that Enoch lived 500 years. It says he lived 365 years, a number so modest by the standards of these antediluvian patriarchs that it almost sounds like a clerical error. His grandfather Jared lived 962 years. His son Methuselah, the longest-lived human being in all of Scripture, would reach 969. But Enoch's life was cut to barely a third of those spans, and the text does not explain why. What it does say, in place of the expected formula, are 7 words that have generated more commentary, more debate, more speculation, and more outright literature than almost any other sentence in the Hebrew Bible. And Enoch walked with God, and he was not, for God took him. Consider what has just happened. In a genealogy designed to do nothing more than move the reader from Adam to Noah, from the first man to the man who will survive the flood, the text has stopped dead. It has broken its own rhythm. It has refused to say the word died. Every other patriarch in this bloodline, every single one, gets the same epitaph, and he died. But for Enoch, the author of Genesis reaches for something else entirely, something so strange and so deliberately ambiguous that translators have been arguing about its precise meaning for well over 2,000 years. He was not, for God took him. In the original Hebrew, the phrase is even more unsettling. The word translated as took is lakach, which can mean to take, to seize, to receive, to carry away. It is the same word used when God takes a rib from Adam to fashion Eve. It is the same word used when a king takes a bride. It implies neither violence nor gentleness. It implies only that the one who was here is now somewhere else, and that the transfer was initiated by God himself. And the word translated as was not, the Hebrew anenu, carries an almost existential weight. He was not. Not he departed. Not he ascended. Not he was translated to heaven. Simply, he was not. As though Enoch, this man who walked alongside the divine for 3 centuries, simply ceased to exist in one place and began to exist in another, or perhaps ceased to exist altogether, or perhaps passed through some threshold that the author of Genesis either could not describe or chose not to. The ambiguity is total. The silence around it is deafening. And into that silence, across the centuries that followed, entire libraries would be written. But before those libraries, before the apocalyptic visions and the angelic hierarchies and the cosmic journeys, it is worth pausing on the man himself, or at least on the shadow of the man that Genesis allows us to glimpse. Enoch was the 7th generation from Adam. That number mattered enormously in the ancient world. 7 was the number of completion, of divine order, of sacred wholeness. The 7th day was the day God rested. The 7th year was the year of release. To be the seventh in a sacred lineage was to occupy a position of peculiar spiritual authority, and the earliest readers of Genesis understood this instinctively. Enoch was not merely another name in a list. He was placed, with deliberate precision, at the fulcrum of a genealogy that stretches from creation to catastrophe. His father Jared's name in certain Hebrew etymologies carries the meaning descent or to come down, a detail that later interpreters would seize upon with considerable enthusiasm, reading into it a prophecy of the fallen angels who would descend to earth in Enoch's own lifetime. Whether this connection was intended by the original authors or imposed upon the text by later readers hungry for patterns is a question that can never be settled with certainty, and that uncertainty is itself part of the story. The book of Genesis was not written as a single document by a single hand. It is a composite, a weaving together of traditions, and the Enoch verses sit at a junction where those traditions seem to pull in different directions at once. One tradition wants to tell you that Enoch was righteous. Another wants to tell you that Enoch was taken. A third, visible only in the gaps, seems to know a much longer story than it is willing to tell. The phrase, walked with God, appears only twice in the entirety of Genesis, once for Enoch, once for Noah. No one else in the patriarchal line receives this distinction. Abraham, who will later be called the friend of God, is told to walk before God, a subtly but importantly different formulation. To walk before God is to walk in obedience, to move under the divine gaze, to live as one being observed. But to walk with God is something else. It implies companionship, intimacy, a shared journey rather than a supervised one. Whatever Enoch was doing during those 365 years, the author of Genesis understood it as something qualitatively different from ordinary human piety. Enoch did not merely worship. He did not merely obey. He walked beside the Creator of the universe as a companion walks beside a friend, and at the end of that walk, instead of dying, he simply was not. Now, this is where a modern reader might be tempted to move on, to file Enoch away as a curiosity, an interesting footnote in a genealogy that exists primarily to get us from Adam to Noah. But the ancient world did not read this way. The ancient world understood that when a sacred text falls silent, when it compresses an extraordinary claim into a handful of words and then changes the subject, the silence is not accidental. It is an invitation. And the ancient world accepted that invitation with staggering enthusiasm. Between roughly the 3rd century before the Common Era and the 1st century of it, Enoch became the subject of what can only be described as an explosion of literary imagination. Writers across the Jewish world, working in Hebrew, in Aramaic, and Greek, produced text after text in Enoch's name, each one claiming to reveal what Genesis had left unsaid. What did Enoch see when God took him? Where did he go? What did he learn? And perhaps most provocatively, what had he witnessed on earth in the years before the flood that made his heavenly translation necessary in the first place? The answers these writers produced would fill hundreds of pages, and they would reshape the religious imagination of the ancient world in ways that are still being felt today. The most important of these texts, the one known simply as the Book of Enoch, or more precisely as 1 Enoch, is not a single book at all. It is a collection, an anthology of 5 distinct works composed at different times by different authors, stitched together over a period of perhaps 300 years and attributed in their entirety to the patriarch who walked with God. The 5 sections, the Book of the Watchers, the Book of Parables, the Astronomical Book, the Book of Dream Visions, and the Epistle of Enoch, together form one of the most remarkable documents to survive from the ancient world. They are also one of the most controversial, one of the most influential, and one of the most deliberately forgotten. To understand why, you have to understand what these texts claimed. They claimed that before the flood, a group of angels looked down from heaven, saw that human women were beautiful, and made a conscious decision to abandon their stations, descend to earth, and take those women as wives. They claimed that these unions produced a race of giants who devoured the earth's resources and turned upon humanity itself. They claimed that the fallen angels taught human beings the arts of war, the secrets of sorcery, the manufacture of weapons, and the use of cosmetics, as though lipstick and swordcraft were equally forbidden knowledge. They claimed that Enoch, the seventh from Adam, was chosen by God to serve as a mediator between heaven and earth, to carry messages to the fallen angels informing them of their doom, and to journey through the cosmos itself, witnessing the architecture of creation, the chambers where weather is stored, the furnaces of the stars, and the throne room of the Almighty. These were not modest claims. They were not safe claims. And for a time, during the centuries immediately before and after the birth of Christianity, they were taken with extraordinary seriousness. The earliest Christians knew the Book of Enoch. The Epistle of Jude, which sits in the New Testament itself, quotes from it directly, citing Enoch by name and treating his words as prophecy. The early church fathers, men like Tertullian and Clement of Alexandria and Irenaeus, referenced the text, debated its authority, and in some cases argued passionately for its inclusion in the biblical canon. For the first 3 centuries of Christian history, the Book of Enoch was not a marginal text. It was not an oddity. It was Scripture, or something very close to it, read and revered across a wide swath of the ancient church. And then, with a decisiveness that still carries the faint scent of panic, it was abandoned. By the 4th century, the major voices of institutional Christianity had turned against Enoch. The reasons were complex, tangled up in theological politics, in anxieties about angelology, and in the growing need for a fixed and controllable canon. But the effect was simple and brutal. The Book of Enoch was dropped. Copies were not preserved. Translations were not maintained. Within a few generations, the text that Jude had quoted as prophecy, the text that had shaped early Christian ideas about angels and demons, about the end of the world, and about the very nature of evil, had effectively vanished from the Western world. For over 1,000 years, the Book of Enoch existed only as a rumor, a handful of quotations in the writings of church fathers, a ghost in the margins of the tradition that had once embraced it. Only in Ethiopia did the flame continue to burn. The Ethiopian Orthodox Church, one of the oldest Christian communities on earth, had received the Book of Enoch in its Ge'ez translation centuries before the Western Church decided to pretend the text did not exist, and the Ethiopians saw no reason to follow the West's lead. For them, the Book of Enoch was canonical. It remained in their Bible. It was read in their churches. It was copied by their scribes, generation after generation, in the same careful Ge'ez script, on the same goatskin parchment, in the same monastic scriptoria, perched on the high plateaus of the Ethiopian highlands. While Europe forgot, Ethiopia remembered. And it was from Ethiopia in the 18th century that the Book of Enoch would make its astonishing return, carried out of Africa by a Scottish adventurer with a taste for danger and a talent for self-promotion, delivered back to a Western world that had no idea what it was about to rediscover. But all of that, the rediscovery, the controversies, the Dead Sea Scrolls fragments that would prove the text's antiquity beyond any reasonable doubt, all of it lies ahead. For now, what matters is the gap. The 7 words in Genesis chapter 5, verse 24. The man who walked with God and then was not. Because every word that follows in this story, every vision and every judgment and every journey through the architecture of heaven flows from that single, irreducible mystery. Something happened to Enoch. The author of Genesis knew what it was, or at least knew a tradition about what it was, and chose to compress it into a silence so charged that it has been generating literature for over 2 millennia. The man who was not. the patriarch who never died, the mortal who walked with the immortal and, at the end of that walk, simply stepped out of the world. What Enoch saw when he stepped through that threshold, and what the ancient writers who inherited his name believed he saw, and what it all meant for the world he left behind, that is the story this telling will attempt to unfold. And it begins, as all the best stories do, not with answers but with a journey. Not with doctrine, but with a man standing at the edge of everything he has ever known, looking out at something the rest of us have never seen, and choosing to keep walking. And the walking led here to the opening chapters of the Book of the Watchers, the oldest section of the Enochic anthology, composed perhaps as early as the 3rd century before the Common Era, and the one that would do more to reshape the ancient world's understanding of evil, of sin, and of the corruption of innocence than almost any other text outside the canon of the Hebrew Bible itself. The Book of the Watchers does not begin gently. It does not ease the reader in. It opens with a declaration of judgment so vast in scope that it makes the hairs on the back of the neck stand at attention, and then, before the reader has had time to catch a breath, it turns its gaze upward toward the heavens and tells a story that would become one of the most enduring and most disturbing origin myths in the history of human thought. The story of the angels who fell not because they rebelled against God, not because they were proud, not because they wanted to seize the throne of heaven, but because they looked down at the daughters of men and wanted them. That distinction matters more than almost anything else in this entire text. The Western tradition, shaped by centuries of Christian theology and by Milton's towering reimagining of the fall of Lucifer, has trained us to think of fallen angels as rebels, as insurgents, as creatures who wanted to be God, or at least to be free of God, and who were cast out for their arrogance. But the Book of the Watchers tells a profoundly different story. In this telling, the angels did not fall because they hated God. They fell because they loved women. They fell because desire, that most human of impulses, crept into beings who were never designed to feel it, and once it took root, it consumed them entirely. The corruption of heaven began not with a war but with a longing, not with a sword but with a glance. The Watchers, in the cosmology of one Enoch, were a class of angels assigned a specific and sacred duty. They were sentinels, guardians. Their name in the original Aramaic, Irin, means precisely what it sounds like: those who watch, those who are awake, those who never sleep. They were stationed in the heavens to observe the workings of creation, to monitor the movements of the stars and the tides and the seasons, and crucially, to watch over humanity itself. They were heaven's eyes on the world below. They had no mandate to intervene, no instructions to descend, no permission to make contact. They were to watch. That was all. And for a time, whether measured in centuries or in ages, the text does not say watching was enough. But the earth in those early days was changing. Humanity was multiplying. The descendants of Adam and Eve were spreading across the land, building settlements, tilling fields, raising children. And among those children were daughters. And the text is very specific about this. The daughters of men were beautiful, not merely pleasant, not merely adequate, beautiful, with the kind of beauty that stops thought and rearranges priorities. The Watchers, gazing down from their celestial stations, saw this beauty, and something in them shifted. Something that had been fixed came loose. Something that was supposed to be permanent became, in a single moment of recognition, terribly and irrevocably conditional. The leader of this particular group of watchers was an angel named Semyaza, and the text presents him with a complexity that is rare in ancient literature. Semyaza was not a fool. He was not reckless. He knew exactly what he was contemplating, and he knew exactly what it would cost. When the desire to descend to earth and take human wives first crystallized among the Watchers, it was Semyaza who articulated both the temptation and the terror. He gathered the others, and according to the text, he spoke with a candor that borders on the heartbreaking, I fear that you will not agree to do this deed, and that I alone will suffer for this great sin." He could see the punishment coming. He could see the abyss opening beneath his feet, and still he could not turn away from what he wanted. But he was not willing to fall alone. Whatever was going to happen, he wanted company. He wanted accomplices. He wanted the shared guilt of a collective decision, so that when the reckoning came, no single angel would bear the full weight of heaven's wrath. This is not the psychology of a rebel. This is the psychology of a man standing on the edge of a cliff, terrified of jumping, more terrified of jumping alone, and utterly incapable of stepping back from the edge. Semyaza knew. That is what makes his story so devastating. He knew what he was about to lose, and he chose to lose it anyway, because the alternative, to go on watching forever without touching, without tasting, without feeling the warmth of another body against his own, had become a torment worse than any punishment heaven could devise. The other watchers responded to Semyaza's fear with a solution that has the cold logic of a conspiracy. They proposed a mutual oath, a binding pact. They would all swear together, every one of them, to descend to earth and take wives from among the daughters of men, and they would bind themselves to this oath with a curse, that if any among them broke faith, if any one of them backed away from the enterprise, the full weight of divine retribution would fall upon the traitor and not upon the group. It was a covenant of shared destruction, a suicide pact dressed in the language of brotherhood, and it was sealed, according to the text, on the summit of a very specific mountain, Mount Hermon. The name itself carries the weight of what happened there, for in Hebrew, Hermon derives from the root kerem, which means devoted to destruction, or more precisely, placed under a ban. Consecrated for annihilation. The mountain that sits on the border between modern Lebanon and Syria, its peak visible from the Jordan Valley, its slopes thick with cedar and snow, was the place where 200 angels stood together and swore an oath that would bring ruin upon the world. The text of 1 Enoch records their number with the precision of a military roster. 200, divided into groups of 10, each group led by a named chieftain, and the text names them. It names every single one, as though the author understood that what these beings were about to do deserved the permanence of a record, that their names should be carved into the text the way a criminal's name is carved into a sentence of judgment. Semyaza led them all. Beneath him were the chieftains: Arakiba, Ramael, Kokabeel, Tamiel, Ramiel, Denel, Ezekiel, Barakijal, Asael, Armaros, Batarel, Ananel, Zakiel, Samsapeel, Satarel, Turel, Yomyel, Sariel. 20 leaders, each commanding 10, 200 in total, and every one of them complicit, every one of them willing, every one of them standing on the summit of Mount Hermon in the full knowledge that what they were about to do was a violation of the most fundamental boundary in the architecture of creation, the boundary between heaven and earth, between the divine and the mortal, between what is eternal and what is made of dust. They swore. The text says they bound themselves by mutual curses, a phrase that resonates with the language of ancient Near Eastern treaty-making, where covenants between kings were sealed not with promises of reward, but with threats of annihilation. If you break this oath, may your cities be razed, may your children be slaughtered, may your name be erased from the memory of the world. The Watchers borrowed this language, this terrifying contractual framework, and turned it upon themselves. They were not merely agreeing to a plan, they were locking themselves into it, burning every bridge back to heaven with a single collective act of will. And then they descended. The text does not describe the descent itself in physical detail, does not tell us whether they fell like stars or walked like men down the slopes of Hermon, does not offer the kind of cinematic spectacle a modern writer might be tempted to construct. It simply says they descended, and in that simplicity there is something almost worse than spectacle. 200 angels, beings of fire and light and ageless intelligence, walking down a mountain and into the world of flesh and time and death, walking toward the villages where human women lived and worked and slept and had no idea what was coming for them, walking away from everything they had been toward everything they were about to become. What happened next unfolded on two fronts, and the text treats both with equal gravity because both were equally catastrophic. The first was biological, the second was intellectual, and between them they would corrupt the world so thoroughly that only a flood of planetary proportions could wash it clean. The biological catastrophe came first. The Watchers took wives. The phrasing of the text borrows directly from the language of Genesis chapter 6, those enigmatic verses that speak of the sons of God seeing the daughters of men and taking wives of all that they chose. But where Genesis compresses this into a few terse lines and moves on, the Book of the Watchers lingers. It dwells. It wants you to understand what these unions meant, not as theology, but as biology, because the children born from the coupling of angel and woman were not ordinary children. They were not even extraordinary children. They were something the world had never seen and was never supposed to see, the Nephilim. The word itself is a problem. It may derive from the Hebrew root nephal, meaning to fall, in which case the Nephilim are the fallen ones, a name that refers to the fall of their angelic fathers. Or it may carry an older, more obscure meaning connected to the Aramaic word for giants, which is how the term is most commonly rendered in translation. But whatever the etymology, the reality was the same. The offspring of angels and women were giants, monstrous in size, insatiable in appetite, violent beyond anything the human world had ever produced or could hope to contain. The Book of the Watchers reports their height at 300 cubits. If we take a cubit as roughly 18 inches, which is the standard measure, that places these creatures at 450 feet tall. The number is almost certainly symbolic rather than literal, a way of communicating not a measurement, but a category. These beings were so far beyond the human scale that they belonged to a different order of existence entirely. They were not large men. They were not even giants in the way that fairy tales use the word. They were cosmic errors, biological impossibilities, living proof that the boundary between heaven and earth had been breached in a way that could not be undone. And they were hungry. The text describes their appetite with a horror that reads almost like a medical report on a disease. The Nephilim consumed everything. They ate the produce of the fields until the fields were empty. They ate the livestock until the pastures were bare. They ate the stores of grain that human communities had laid aside for winter, for planting, for survival. And when the food ran out, when there was nothing left to consume, they turned on humanity itself. They began to eat people. And when even that was not enough, they began to drink blood. And finally, in a detail that seems designed to push the reader past the limits of revulsion, they began to sin against the animals, against the birds, against the fish, against every living thing, as though the corruption of their very existence had become a contagion that spread to everything they touched. The world Enoch inhabited, the antediluvian world of the early patriarchs, was being devoured from the inside. And the angels who had fathered these monsters were not idle while their children fed. They were teaching. This is the second catastrophe, and in some ways it is the more interesting one, because it reveals something about the world view of the authors of the Book of the Watchers that goes far deeper than mythology. The forbidden knowledge that the Watchers taught to humanity was not merely dangerous, it was premature. It was knowledge that human beings would eventually have needed, or at least encountered, in the natural course of their development. But it was given to them too soon, too fast, without the wisdom necessary to wield it responsibly. And the text catalogues this knowledge with a specificity that suggests the authors were not inventing a list at random, but were making a deliberate argument about the nature of civilization itself. The angel Azazel, who emerges in the Book of the Watchers as the second most important figure among the fallen, taught humanity the art of metalwork. He showed men how to forge swords, how to make knives, how to craft shields and breastplates. He gave them the technology of war. Before Azazel, according to this telling, human beings did not know how to kill each other efficiently. They could quarrel. They could fight with fists and stones. But they did not have the industrialized machinery of death. Azazel gave them that, and in doing so, he accelerated the timeline of human violence by what the text implies were generations, perhaps centuries. War did not evolve among men as a slow, terrible, organic development. It was handed to them, fully formed, by an angel who should have known better. But Azazel's teachings did not stop at weapons. He also taught women the use of antimony and the beautification of the eyelids, the art of cosmetics, the use of precious stones for ornamentation, the dyeing of fabrics, and the craft of jewelry. At first glance, this seems almost comically trivial set alongside the technology of warfare. What harm could eyeshadow possibly do compared to a sword? But the authors of the Book of the Watchers did not see it that way. For them, cosmetics and ornamentation were not neutral. They were instruments of deception, tools for the artificial enhancement of beauty, and beauty, in the logic of this text, was the very thing that had started the catastrophe in the first place. The daughters of men were beautiful, and the Watchers desired them. By teaching women to amplify that beauty through artifice, Azazel was not merely giving them a skill. He was weaponizing the thing that had broken heaven. He was turning human beauty into a lure, a trap, a mechanism for the perpetuation of the very desire that had brought the angels crashing down. The other Watchers taught other things, and the text lists their contributions with the methodical patience of an indictment being read before a court. Semyaza himself taught the arts of enchantment and the cutting of roots, which is to say, herbalism and sorcery, the manipulation of the natural world for purposes it was not designed to serve. Armoros taught the resolving of enchantments, which sounds like a counterspell and may have been precisely that, the knowledge of how to undo magical bindings, a skill that presupposes the existence of the bindings themselves. Barakijal taught astrology, the reading of the stars not as objects of wonder, but as instruments of divination, tools for predicting and manipulating the future. Kokabil taught the knowledge of the constellations. Ezekiel taught the knowledge of clouds, which may refer to weather prediction or weather manipulation or both. Arakiel taught the signs of the earth, perhaps geomancy, perhaps seismology, perhaps the reading of omens and the patterns of the soil. Shamsiel taught the signs of the sun. Sariel taught the course of the moon. The Watchers did not teach humanity random skills. They taught them the secrets of the cosmos. They taught them how to read the heavens, how to predict the movements of celestial bodies, how to manipulate the forces of nature, how to reshape their own appearances, how to kill with precision and efficiency. They taught them, in short, the knowledge of angels. They broke the information monopoly that heaven held over earth, and they did it not out of generosity but out of desire, as a bride price, as the gifts a suitor brings to the family of the woman he intends to marry. The forbidden knowledge was not stolen by humanity, the way Promethean fire was stolen in the Greek tradition. It was given freely, as part of a transaction, and the transaction was the angels' access to human women. Knowledge for flesh, secrets for intimacy, the keys to the cosmos for the warmth of a human bed. The consequences were immediate, and they were total. The text describes a world spiraling into chaos. Violence spread across the earth as men, now armed with swords and shields and the knowledge of how to use them, turned upon one another with a ferocity that had not existed before. The Nephilim, growing larger and hungrier by the day, consumed everything in their path. Sorcery corrupted the natural order. The stars, once silent witnesses to the divine plan, were now being read and manipulated by human beings who had no business knowing their secrets. The earth itself, according to the text, began to cry out. Not metaphorically. The Book of the Watchers uses language that suggests the planet itself, the physical world, was in agony, overwhelmed by the weight of what was happening on its surface, unable to bear the corruption that the Watchers' descent had unleashed. And it was this cry, this planetary scream of distress, that finally reached the ears of heaven. 4 archangels, Michael, Uriel, Raphael, and Gabriel, the highest-ranking angels in the heavenly hierarchy, looked down upon the earth and saw what the Watchers had done. The text gives each of them a moment of horrified recognition, as though they were witnesses arriving at the scene of a crime so vast that it took 4 separate perspectives to comprehend it. They saw the blood. They saw the violence. They saw the Nephilim feeding. They saw the sorcery spreading. They saw human beings crying out in desperation, their prayers rising toward a heaven that seemed to have abandoned them. And the 4 archangels, unable to act on their own authority, did the only thing they could do. They brought the matter before God. Their petition to the Most High is one of the most remarkable passages in the entire Book of the Watchers, because it does something that very few ancient texts dare to do. It puts words in the mouths of angels who are addressing God directly, and those words are not worship. They are not praise. They are a report, a complaint, almost an accusation. You see what Azazel has done, they say, how he has taught all manner of iniquity upon the earth, and revealed the eternal secrets that are made in heaven. You see what Semyaza has done, to whom you gave authority to rule over those who are with him. The implication is staggering in its boldness. You gave Semyaza his authority. You placed him in his position. You trusted him with the watch, and he betrayed that trust. And now the earth is drowning in the consequences of a failure that began in your own court. God's response, when it comes, is not gentle. It is not merciful. It is not even particularly sympathetic to the suffering of humanity, though it acknowledges that suffering with a terrible clarity. What it is, primarily, is final. God issues a series of commands, one to each of the 4 archangels, and each command addresses a different aspect of the catastrophe. To Uriel, God gives the task of warning Noah. Go to the son of Lamech, God says, and tell him what is coming. Tell him to hide himself, for the whole earth is about to be destroyed. A flood is coming. A deluge that will cover every inch of the land, and everything upon it will perish. But Noah will survive, and from Noah's seed a new humanity will be planted, one that will endure for all generations. This is the first mention of the flood in the Enochic literature, and it is delivered not as a story, but as a military briefing. Here is what is going to happen. Here is the timeline. And here is the single human being who will be spared. To Raphael, God gives the task of binding Azazel. The command is specific and visceral. Bind Azazel hand and foot, cast him into darkness. Make a hole in the desert of Dudiel, a place whose name means something like God's cauldron, or the crucible of God, and throw him into it. Cover him with jagged rocks. Cover him with darkness. Let him stay there until the great day of judgment, when he will be cast into the fire. And heal the earth, God adds, almost as an afterthought. Heal the earth that the angels have corrupted, and proclaim the healing of the earth, that the plague may be healed, and that all the children of men may not perish through the knowledge that the Watchers revealed and taught to their sons. The language here is extraordinary. God does not say that the knowledge itself was evil. He says that it was revealed too soon, taught to beings who were not ready for it, and that the earth must be healed of the damage caused by that premature revelation. The sin of the Watchers in this telling was not that they possessed forbidden knowledge. They were angels. The knowledge was native to them. The sin was the sharing. The sin was the crossing of a boundary that existed for a reason. the same boundary that Semyaza and his 200 had crossed when they descended from their stations and walked into the world of flesh. To Gabriel, God gives the most gruesome command of all. Go to the bastards, God says, using a word that means illegitimate offspring, mongrel children, beings who should never have been born. Go to the reprobates, to the children of fornication. Destroy the children of the watchers from among the children of men. Send them against one another. Let them destroy each other in battle, for they shall have no length of days. The Nephilim, the giants, the monstrous progeny of angel and woman, are to be set against one another in a war of mutual annihilation. God will not send his own armies to destroy them. He will turn them loose upon each other and let their own violence consume them. Every one of their fathers petitioned for eternal life for their offspring. God says no. Each of them shall live 500 years, no more. A lifespan that would be extraordinary for a human being is, for the children of immortals, a death sentence delivered in the language of arithmetic. And to Michael, the greatest of the archangels, God gives the task of binding Semyaza and all his associates. Bind them for 70 generations under the hills of the earth, until the day of their judgment and their consummation, until the judgment that is forever and ever is accomplished. On that day, God says, they will be led to the abyss of fire, to the torment, to the prison where they will be confined forever. And everyone who has been condemned, everyone who has allied themselves with the watchers, will be bound with them until the destruction of all generations. 70 generations. The number is precise, and it is theological. It mirrors the 70 years of the Babylonian exile. It echoes the 70 nations of Genesis chapter 10. It suggests a period of waiting, of suffering, of imprisonment that is long enough to feel like eternity, but is in fact merely the anteroom to eternity. The watchers will not be destroyed immediately. They will wait. They will lie beneath the earth, bound and conscious and aware, knowing that the fire is coming, knowing that the judgment is inevitable, knowing that every moment of pleasure they experienced in the arms of human women is being paid for in millennia of darkness. The punishment is not just physical, it is temporal. It is the knowledge that time, which they once watched flow from their celestial vantage points with detached serenity, is now their enemy, counting down toward an annihilation that they can see approaching but cannot escape. The binding of the watchers, as described in the Book of the Watchers, is one of the most influential passages in the history of religious literature. It establishes a template that would echo through Jewish apocalypticism, through early Christian theology, through the New Testament itself. The idea that fallen angels are not free, that they are imprisoned, that they are held in chains of darkness awaiting judgment, appears in the second epistle of Peter and in the epistle of Jude, both of which use language so close to the Enochic original that the borrowing is beyond dispute. The concept of a final judgment in which the wicked are cast into eternal fire, a concept that would become central to Christian eschatology, finds one of its earliest and most vivid expressions here in the commands that God gives to his archangels in the opening chapters of the Book of the Watchers. But perhaps the most haunting element of the entire episode is what happens to the watchers before they are bound. Because before the chains come, before the darkness closes in, Semyaza and his angels make one final attempt to escape their fate. They send Enoch, the man who walks with God, as their intercessor. They ask him to write a petition on their behalf, a prayer of forgiveness, a plea for mercy, and to present it before the throne of the Most High. And Enoch agrees. He writes the petition. He ascends. He stands before the presence of God and reads the words that 200 condemned angels have asked him to speak. And God says, no, the petition is denied. The mercy is refused. The watchers are told, through Enoch, that they were supposed to intercede on behalf of men, not men on behalf of them. They were supposed to be the ones carrying prayers upward, not the ones begging for prayers to be carried on their behalf. The reversal is complete, and it is devastating. The guardians have become the guarded. The watchers have become the watched. The beings who were placed in heaven to observe humanity have been reduced to begging a human being to speak to God for them, and even that final humiliation produces nothing. No reprieve, no reduction in sentence, no last-minute pardon, only silence, and then the sound of chains. What the authors of the Book of the Watchers constructed in these chapters was not merely a myth about fallen angels. It was a comprehensive theology of corruption. It explained where evil came from, not from human nature alone, but from a catastrophic breach in the structure of creation itself. It explained why the world was full of violence, why men knew how to forge weapons and wage war, why women painted their faces and adorned themselves with jewels, why sorcerers could manipulate the forces of nature, why astrologers could read the stars. All of it, every dark art and every dangerous technology, was a gift from heaven, delivered by beings who should have known better, accepted by beings who could not have known what they were accepting. Humanity, in this telling, was not the author of its own corruption. It was the victim of a cosmic crime, seduced and armed and abandoned by the very beings who had been charged with its protection. And Enoch, the man who walked with God, the seventh from Adam, the patriarch, who was not because God took him, stood at the center of it all. He was the witness. He was the messenger. He was the scribe who recorded the judgment and delivered the verdict. He was the human being whom God trusted enough to show the machinery of heaven and the architecture of justice. And what God showed him next, the journeys through the cosmos, the places of punishment, the chambers of the winds and the storehouses of the stars, would take Enoch further from the human world than any mortal had ever gone, and bring him face to face with things that would reshape his understanding of everything. The journey begins not at the edges of the world, but at the threshold of heaven itself. After Enoch has delivered the condemned watcher's petition and received God's refusal, after he has been made to understand that no mercy will be extended to the angels who abandoned their posts, he is not sent home. He is not dismissed. He is drawn upward, deeper into the divine architecture, and what the text describes from this point forward reads less like a religious narrative and more like the field report of a man who has wandered into a dimension governed by different physical laws and is doing his best, with a vocabulary designed for earthly things, to describe what he sees. The first thing Enoch encounters is a wall built of hailstones, surrounded on every side by tongues of fire. He passes through it. On the other side stands a house, a great house, and the text reaches for every contradiction it can find to communicate the strangeness of this structure. The house is built of hailstones, yet it burns. Its floor is made of fire, yet it is solid enough to walk on. Above it, the ceiling moves like the paths of the stars, like lightning, and between the stars and the fire are burning cherubim. The temperature inside is simultaneously extreme in both directions, as hot as fire and as cold as ice. No comfort exists in this space, no warmth that does not scald, no coolness that does not freeze. The human categories of pleasant and unpleasant, of bearable and unbearable, have no purchase here. This is a place that exists outside the range of human tolerance, and Enoch, standing within it, is already further from the world he knows than any living being has ever been. But this house, this structure of fire and ice and hailstone, is merely the anteroom. Beyond it lies another house, and this second house is greater than the first in every dimension, and the text's language begins to strain under the weight of what it is trying to convey. The second house is built entirely of flame. Its floor is fire. Its ceiling is fire. Its walls are fire. The entire structure blazes with a light so intense that Enoch cannot look at it directly, yet he continues forward because something is drawing him, something beyond the fire, something at the center of everything. And there, in the innermost chamber, he sees the throne. The description of the divine throne is one of the great set pieces of ancient visionary literature, and it deserves to be read with the kind of attention one brings to a painting that has been labored over for years. The throne's appearance, Enoch says, is like crystal, and its wheels are like the shining sun, and from beneath the throne flow rivers of flaming fire, and it is impossible to look upon it. The great glory sits upon the throne, and his raiment shines more brightly than the sun, and is whiter than any snow. No angel can enter this house, and no mortal flesh can look upon his face, because the fire blazes around him, and a great fire stands before him, and none of those who surround him can approach. 10,000 times 10,000 stand before him, yet he needs no counselor. The most holy ones who are near to him do not leave by night, nor do they depart from him. And until this moment, Enoch has been prostrate on the ground, face down, trembling, every part of his mortal frame shaking with a terror that the text does not try to minimize or dignify. He is afraid. He is overwhelmed. He is a man made of dust, lying on a floor made of fire, in a room made of light, and every instinct he possesses is telling him that he does not belong here, that his presence in this place is a violation of the natural order as fundamental as the one that brought the watchers crashing down to earth. But God speaks to him, and the voice does not destroy him. Fear not, Enoch, you righteous man and scribe of righteousness. Approach hither and hear my voice. Enoch lifts his face. One of the holy ones comes to him, raises him up, brings him to the door of the inner chamber. And Enoch looks in, still trembling, still expecting annihilation, and sees the interior, a structure of crystal, with a ceiling like the path of the stars and lightning, and between them burning cherubim, and a sky of water, and a floor of fire, and fire surrounding everything, and at the center, the throne, and on the throne, the presence that defies every attempt at description and yet demands that the attempt be made. What is remarkable about this passage is not merely its imagery, stunning though that imagery is. What is remarkable is its psychology. The authors of the Book of the Watchers understood, with an intuition that borders on genius, that the experience of standing before the divine would not be rapture, it would not be bliss, it would be terror. Absolute, body-shaking, mind-dissolving terror, because the human frame was not designed for this. The human eye was not calibrated for this light. The human mind was not built to contain this scale. Enoch does not float serenely into the presence of God the way a mystic in a later tradition might describe an encounter with the divine. He collapses, he shakes. He is lifted up by an angel because he cannot lift himself. The encounter with the divine, in this telling, is not gentle. It is survived. And having survived it, having stood at the threshold of the innermost chamber, and heard the voice of the great glory, and not been consumed, Enoch is given his commission. He is to go to the watchers, and tell them that their petition has been denied, that they shall have no peace and no forgiveness, that their children will be slain before their eyes, and that they themselves will be bound beneath the earth until the judgment. He is, in essence, heaven's process server, the mortal who has been granted access to the highest court in creation and sent back with the verdict. It is a role of staggering importance and absolute humiliation, because the message he carries is not hope, it is finality. And the beings he must deliver it to are creatures of fire and power, who once watched over the very stars, now reduced to listening to a man made of clay read them their sentence. But God is not finished with Enoch. The commission to deliver judgment to the watchers is only the beginning. What follows is a series of journeys that take Enoch to the very ends of the earth and beyond, through landscapes that no human foot has ever touched, and that the text describes with a specificity that suggests the authors believed they were mapping real geography, not inventing allegory. The cosmos Enoch traverses is not an abstraction. It has mountains and rivers and valleys and walls. It has weather systems and storage facilities and prisons and gardens. It is, in every sense, a built environment, and the builder's fingerprints are visible on every surface. The first journey takes Enoch westward, toward the place where the luminaries of heaven set, and what he sees as he travels is a world that grows increasingly strange, increasingly hostile to human life, and increasingly saturated with the presence of the divine. He comes to a river of fire that flows like water and empties into the great sea that lies to the west. He sees great rivers, rivers larger than any that flow through the inhabited world, and each of them carries the waters toward the darkness and toward the deep. He comes to the place where no flesh can walk, a region at the edge of the world where the laws of nature as human beings understand them no longer apply, where the air itself is different, where the light behaves in ways that Enoch cannot fully articulate. He sees the winds that stretch out the vault of heaven, the forces that hold the sky in place. This is not poetic license. The cosmology of the Book of the Watchers is a physical cosmology, one in which the sky is a solid structure, a vault or dome, and the winds are the mechanical forces that maintain its integrity. The sky does not hover. It is held up. It is stretched out like a tent over the earth, and the winds are the ropes and the pegs that keep it taut. Enoch sees these mechanisms, these engineering systems of the cosmos, and records them with the matter-of-fact precision of a man who has been taken on a tour of a factory and is taking notes. He comes to the cornerstone of the earth. The phrase is extraordinary in its simplicity. The earth, in this cosmology, has a cornerstone, a single point upon which the entire structure rests, the way a building rests upon its foundation stone. Enoch sees it. He does not describe its material or its dimensions or its color. He simply notes its existence, as though the fact that the earth has a physical underpinning, a literal stone upon which everything else has been built, is so obvious that it requires no elaboration. The world is a structure. Structures have foundations. Enoch has seen the foundation. That is all. Beyond the cornerstone, he sees 4 winds that bear the earth and the firmament of heaven. Again, the language is mechanical, structural, architectural. The winds are not breezes. They are pillars. They are supports. They are the load-bearing elements of a cosmos that has been designed and built and is being maintained by forces that human beings cannot see, but that Enoch, standing at the edge of everything, can now observe directly. The universe in this telling is not a mystery. It is a machine, an impossibly vast, impossibly beautiful, impossibly terrifying machine, and Enoch is watching it work. He comes to the storehouses of the winds, and the way the text describes these storehouses reveals something important about the theological imagination of the authors. The winds are not free. They are stored. They are kept in specific locations and released in specific quantities at specific times, and the implication is that weather, from the gentlest breeze to the most devastating storm, is not random. It is administered. Every wind that has ever blown across the face of the earth was taken from its storehouse by an angel, carried to the appropriate location, and released according to a schedule that has been determined in advance. The world is not chaotic. It only looks chaotic from below, from the perspective of human beings who cannot see the storerooms and the schedules and the angels who manage the distribution. From above, from Enoch's vantage point, the chaos resolves into order, and the order is absolute. And then Enoch sees the stars that have transgressed. This is one of the strangest and most haunting passages in the entire Book of the Watchers, and it connects the cosmic geography of Enoch's journey to the moral geography of the Watcher's fall in a way that reveals the deep structure of the text's worldview. Enoch comes to a place of desolation, a place at the end of the great earth, and there he sees 7 stars bound together, burning, and he asks the angel who accompanies him what these stars have done to deserve imprisonment. The angel tells him, "These are stars that have transgressed the commandment of the Lord. They did not come forth at their appointed times. They failed to follow their prescribed courses. They deviated from the order that had been assigned to them, and for this deviation they have been bound in this place for 10,000 years, until the time of their punishment is complete." Stars. Not angels, not humans, stars. Celestial bodies that failed to follow their orbits, that departed from their assigned paths, that exercised something resembling autonomy in a cosmos where autonomy is indistinguishable from rebellion. The authors of the Book of the Watchers inhabited a universe in which obedience was the fundamental principle governing all things, from the highest angel to the lowest luminous point in the sky. Every being, every object, every force in creation had been given a role, a station, a path, and departure from that path, whether motivated by desire or by negligence or by some inscrutable impulse that only a star could feel, was punishable by imprisonment. The watchers left their stations. The stars left their orbits. The punishment for both is the same: binding darkness and the long wait for fire. This parallel is not accidental. It is the spine of the text's moral logic. The cosmos is a hierarchy of obedience. Every being in creation has been assigned a place, and the highest virtue is to remain in that place, to fulfill the role one has been given, to follow the path one has been set upon without deviation, without complaint, without the fatal curiosity that leads to crossing boundaries. The watchers failed this test spectacularly, and the stars failed it cosmically, and the symmetry between the two failures reveals what the Book of the Watchers considers to be the root of all evil. Not malice, not cruelty, not even desire per se, but the refusal to stay where one has been put. The sin that breaks the world is the sin of displacement, the sin of wanting to be somewhere other than where you are, the sin of looking at the boundary that separates your station from another and deciding to cross it. Enoch moves on. He comes to a great abyss, and the abyss is filled with columns of heavenly fire, and the columns are falling, and the abyss has no bottom and no firmament. It is a void, a gap in the structure of creation, and even the angels fear it. This is the place where the disobedient stars will spend their eternity, and it is also, the text implies, the prototype for the place where the watchers will spend theirs, a darkness without floor or ceiling, a space where the very concept of location dissolves, where falling never ends because there is no ground to stop the fall. And yet, even in this landscape of punishment and terror, beauty persists. Enoch sees mountains, 7 mountains of magnificent stones, 3 toward the east and 3 toward the south, and each mountain is different from the others. Some are made of precious stones, some of colored stones, some of antimony. The mountains are described with a sensory richness that stands in deliberate contrast to the abyss he has just left, as though the authors wanted to remind the reader that the cosmos is not merely a penal system. It is also a garden. It is also a work of art. The same God who designed the prison of the stars also designed the mountains of precious stone, and both reflect the same creative intelligence, the same attention to detail, the same insistence on specificity that characterizes the entire Enochic cosmos. Among these mountains stands one that is shaped like a throne, and around it are fragrant trees unlike any that grow in the inhabited world. One tree in particular draws Enoch's attention, a tree whose fragrance is beyond all fragrance, whose leaves and blossoms and wood never wither, and whose fruit is beautiful, resembling the clusters of a date palm. Enoch has never seen anything like it, and neither, the text implies, has anyone else. He asks the angel Raphael what this tree is, And Raphael's answer lifts the narrative out of geography and into eschatology. This is the tree of life, Raphael tells him. This is the tree, whose fruit will be given to the righteous and the holy after the great judgment, when God comes to visit the earth with goodness. The tree will be transplanted to the holy place, to the temple of the Lord, the eternal King, and its fragrance will enter the bones of the righteous, and they will live a long life on the earth as their fathers lived. And in their days no sorrow, no plague, no torment, no calamity will touch them. The tree of life, of course, has appeared before, in the opening chapters of Genesis, planted in the middle of the Garden of Eden alongside the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. After the fall of Adam and Eve, God placed cherubim with a flaming sword at the east of Eden to guard the way to the tree of life, to prevent the now mortal, now sinful human beings from eating its fruit and living forever in their corrupted state. The tree was cut off, access was denied, immortality was withdrawn. But the Book of the Watchers reveals that the tree was not destroyed. It was moved. It was relocated to the ends of the earth, to a place that no living human being could reach, and it was kept there, blooming in secret, its fragrance filling the air around the mountains of precious stone, waiting for the day when the judgment would come, and the righteous would be permitted to eat from it once more. The promise is not that death will be reversed. The promise is that life will be restored, a long life, a good life, a life without the weight of the corruption that the Watchers introduced. The tree of life is the cure that the earth has been waiting for, and it exists, the text insists, in a real place at the edge of the real world, guarded and preserved and ready. Enoch's second great journey takes him to the places of the dead, and what he finds there is one of the most theologically sophisticated passages in all of Second Temple Jewish literature. He comes to a mountain in the west, a great and high mountain of hard rock, and within it are 4 hollow places, deep and wide and very smooth. 3 of these hollow places are dark, and 1 is light, with a fountain of water in its midst. Enoch asks the angel Raphael, again his guide, what these places are, and Raphael's answer is precise and chilling. These hollow places, he says, have been created for the spirits of the souls of the dead. Here they will be gathered. Here they will remain until the day of the great judgment, when they will be judged and their cases determined. 4 compartments, not 1, not 2, 4, and each serves a different category of the dead. The first, the one with the bright light and the spring of water, is for the spirits of the righteous, those who lived well and died well and now wait in comfort for the resurrection. The second is for sinners who died without suffering the full consequences of their sins during their lifetimes, those who escaped earthly justice and who will therefore face divine justice at the final reckoning. The third is for those who were slain, for the victims, the murdered, the innocent dead who cry out for justice. And the fourth is for sinners who were never held accountable, who never even came close to accountability, and who will not be visited with punishment at the day of judgment, because they have already been assigned their permanent fate. They will not be raised. They will remain in this hollow place forever, neither punished further nor released, simply held, stored, filed away in the architecture of divine record-keeping. This fourfold division of the afterlife is a remarkable theological development. Genesis says almost nothing about what happens after death. The Hebrew Bible, taken as a whole, is famously reticent on the subject, offering only the vaguest references to Sheol, the shadowy underworld where the dead exist in a kind of diminished consciousness. But the Book of the Watchers goes much further. It provides a detailed map of the afterlife, a geography of death, and in doing so, it introduces ideas that would become foundational for both Jewish and Christian thinking about the fate of the soul. The separation of the righteous from the wicked after death, the concept of a holding place where spirits wait for final judgment, and the idea that different categories of the dead receive different treatment. All of these concepts which would later be developed into the Christian doctrines of heaven, hell, purgatory, and limbo, find early and vivid expression here, in the hollow places inside a mountain at the western edge of Enoch's cosmos. The spring of water in the compartment of the righteous is a detail worth pausing over. In a text so saturated with fire, with burning, with the imagery of heat and light pushed to their extremes, the presence of cool water in the dwelling of the just feels almost revolutionary. The righteous dead are not merely stored. They are refreshed. They are sustained. They are given, even in death, the one thing that the Nephilim were denied: satisfaction. The giants hungered and could not be filled. The demon spirits hunger still and can never eat. But the righteous dead drink from a spring of living water and wait in light, and their waiting is not torment. It is rest. The contrast is deliberate, and it is devastating. Enoch continues his journeys, and the landscapes he traverses become increasingly symbolic, increasingly charged with theological meaning, though the text never abandons its insistence on physical specificity. He sees the mouths of all the rivers of the earth and the mouth of the deep. He sees the treasuries of all the winds and the cornerstone of the earth. He sees the flaming columns that descend beyond the measure of angels and men. He comes to a place where the heaven above has an end, and the earth below has an end, and between them is a great chasm, and in the chasm is fire that burns eternally, and on either side of the chasm are mountains of iron, and mountains of copper, and mountains of silver, and mountains of gold, and mountains of soft metal, and mountains of lead. These metal mountains are not decorative, they are functional. They are the raw materials of the cosmos, the mineral foundations upon which the physical world has been built, and their arrangement, their proximity to the abyss, their relationship to the fire and the void, suggests a universe in which the distinction between the natural and the supernatural is not a distinction at all. The metals that human beings mine from the earth are the same metals that form the pillars of the heavenly architecture. The fire that burns in a forge is the same fire that burns in the abyss. The universe is continuous. It is all one fabric, woven from the same threads, and the reason human beings cannot see the full pattern is not that the pattern does not exist, but that they are standing too close to one small corner of it. He comes to a place at the edge of the earth where the heavens rest, and the heavens are described as a great gate, open and burning, and through the gate pours a fire so vast that Enoch cannot measure it. He sees the 7 mountains again, arranged like a throne, with fragrant trees surrounding them, and among those trees is one that stands apart, and its fragrance surpasses all the others. Its trunk is like that of no other tree. Its leaves are like those of a carob tree, and its fruit is like the clusters of a vine, beautiful beyond beauty, and its fragrance reaches far, far beyond the garden that contains it. The angel tells Enoch that this fragrant tree shall not be touched until the great judgment, when everything will be requited forever. Then it will be given to the righteous and the humble. And here the text pulls together the threads of Enoch's journey into a single, overwhelming vision of cosmic justice. The same God who built the prison of the stars and the abyss of fire and the hollow places of the dead also planted this tree, this impossible, perfect, fragrant tree, and is keeping it safe, keeping it hidden, keeping it alive at the edge of everything, waiting for the day when the accounts are settled and the righteous can finally eat from it and live. The cosmos is not merely a system of punishments. It is also a system of promises. The architecture of heaven includes not only prisons but gardens, not only chains but trees whose fruit tastes of eternity. Enoch sees more. He comes to the ends of the earth where heaven rests upon it. He sees a great chasm with pillars of heavenly fire, and among them are pillars of fire that are neither to be measured in height nor in depth. He sees a great abyss beyond the chasm, and in it are stars with no luminosity, and beyond them is a void where there is nothing, neither the firmament of heaven above nor the earth below, neither water nor birds, but a desolate and terrible place. And in this void he sees 7 stars, like great burning mountains, and the angel tells him that this is the place of the end of heaven and earth, a prison for the stars and the host of heaven. The stars that roll over the fire, these are the ones that transgress the commandment of God at the beginning of their rising, because they did not come forth at their appointed times. And he was wroth with them, and bound them until the time when their guilt should be consummated, even for 10,000 years. The repetition is intentional. The Book of the Watchers returns to the transgressing stars more than once, circling back to them as Enoch circles through the cosmos, because the stars are the key to understanding the moral architecture of everything else. If stars can sin, if celestial bodies can disobey, if objects that human beings assume to be inanimate can exercise agency and be punished for exercising it wrongly, then the universe is not a dead mechanism. It is alive. It is conscious. It is, in its entirety, a community of obedient and disobedient beings, and the difference between a star that follows its orbit and a star that does not is the same difference as between a watcher who keeps his station and a watcher who descends to earth. The moral law that governs angels governs stars. The physical law that governs stars governs angels. And both laws are expressions of the same underlying principle. The will of the God who sits on the crystal throne in the house of fire and speaks to a trembling man with the words, "Fear not." Enoch also sees, in the course of his journeys, the garden where the righteous dwell. Not the tree of life alone, but the entire garden, the place that Genesis called Eden, and that the Book of the Watchers places at the geographical extremity of the earth, east of the inhabited world, beyond mountains and deserts and waters that no living person can cross. The garden is described with a tenderness that stands in stark contrast to the severity of the prisons and abysses that surround it. The trees are beautiful. The fragrance is sweet. The air is clear. And the garden is, the text implies, still occupied, still tended, still alive, still waiting. The gate is shut. The cherubim still guard it. But the garden itself has not decayed. It has not been abandoned. It has been preserved, the same way the tree of life has been preserved, the same way the compartment of the righteous dead has been furnished with light and water, as evidence that the God who judges also keeps his promises, and that the harshness of the punishment is matched somewhere at the edge of everything by the gentleness of the reward. What Enoch has been shown over the course of these 2 great journeys is nothing less than the complete geography of divine justice. He has seen where the wicked are punished. He has seen where the righteous wait. He has seen the prison of the stars and the abyss of the angels and the hollow places of the dead. He has seen the tree of life and the garden of the righteous and the throne of God itself. He has been given, in effect, a map of the moral universe, a 3-dimensional representation of the principles that govern all of creation, from the highest angel to the lowest stone. And the map is both beautiful and terrible, both reassuring and horrifying, because it reveals a cosmos in which justice is absolute, in which nothing is forgotten, in which every transgression and every act of faithfulness is recorded and will be addressed. If not in time, then in eternity. If not in this age, then in the age to come. And the map is not a metaphor. That is the crucial point. The authors of the Book of the Watchers did not believe they were constructing allegories. They believed they were describing real places, real structures, real features of the physical cosmos that happen to be located beyond the reach of ordinary human experience. The storehouses of the winds were real storehouses. The cornerstone of the earth was a real stone. The mountain of the dead was a real mountain, with real hollow places inside it. The tree of life was a real tree with real fruit that a real person could, under the right circumstances, eat. The visionary literature of Second Temple Judaism was not escapist. It was cartographic. It was an attempt to map the totality of creation, including the parts that human eyes could not see, and to demonstrate that the same divine order that governed the visible world governed the invisible one, and that the two were not separate domains but different regions of the same continuous reality. Enoch returns from these journeys changed in ways that the text does not fully articulate, but that everything that follows makes clear. He has stood at the boundary of the knowable world and looked beyond it. He has seen the machinery of the cosmos, the engineering that keeps the sky in place, and the storerooms that distribute the weather, and the prisons that hold the disobedient. He has stood in the presence of God and heard the divine voice and survived. He has been shown the future of the righteous and the fate of the wicked and the perfect, patient, terrifying justice that awaits all created things. He is, in every meaningful sense, no longer the man he was. He has been given knowledge that no mortal was ever intended to possess, and unlike the knowledge that the Watchers gave to humanity, the forbidden arts and the secret sciences, this knowledge was given with permission. It was given with purpose. It was given because God chose to give it, and the choice was deliberate, and the purpose was that Enoch should carry it back and write it down and leave it for the generations that would come after him, so that the righteous would know what awaited them, and the wicked would know what they could not escape. The man who walked with God had now seen the house where God lives. He had walked the corridors of a cosmos built on justice and maintained by obedience, a cosmos in which fire and ice coexist in the same room, and rivers of flame flow like water, and stars are punished for being late. He had looked into the abyss and seen no bottom. He had looked at the tree of life and smelled its fragrance, and been told that one day, after the judgment, the righteous would eat from it and know no sorrow. He had been inside the architecture of eternity, and now he carried that architecture within him, encoded in memory and in the scrolls he would write, a blueprint for a universe that most human beings would never see, but that every human being, according to the Book of the Watchers, was already living inside. And the visions were not over. They were, in fact, only beginning. Because the Book of the Watchers was only the first movement in a much longer symphony, and the sections that followed would take the figure of Enoch into territories even more radical, even more contested, and even more consequential than the cosmic geography of the first 36 chapters. A figure was coming. A figure glimpsed in visions that would shake the foundations of messianic expectation and reverberate through the centuries into the very heart of Christian theology. Enoch was about to meet the Son of Man. The Book of Parables, sometimes called the Similitudes of Enoch, occupies chapters 37 through 71 of 1 Enoch, and it is, by any measure, the most theologically explosive section of the entire anthology. It is also the most controversial, the most debated, and, for reasons that will become clear, the most inconvenient for anyone who wants to draw a clean, uncomplicated line between Judaism and Christianity. Because what the Book of Parables contains, set down in writing during a period that most scholars place somewhere between the late 1st century before the Common Era and the early decades of the 1st century of the Common Era, is a vision of a pre-existent, divine, messianic figure who sits on a throne of glory, who judges the kings and the powerful of the earth, who vindicates the righteous and raises the dead, and who is called, repeatedly and with unmistakable emphasis, the Son of Man. If that title sounds familiar, it should. It is the title that the Gospels place most frequently on the lips of Jesus of Nazareth. The implications of this overlap have kept scholars awake at night for well over a century, and we will come to those implications in due course. But first, the text itself, because the Book of Parables deserves to be encountered on its own terms, as a work of visionary literature that stands among the most ambitious and most emotionally devastating pieces of religious writing produced in the ancient world. The parables open with Enoch receiving a vision of wisdom, and the language from the very first verse establishes a tone that is markedly different from the Book of the Watchers. The earlier text was cartographic, concerned with mapping the cosmos, cataloging its features, recording the locations of prisons and storehouses and mountains. The Book of Parables is concerned with something more intimate and more dangerous, the meaning of history. It wants to know why the righteous suffer. It wants to know why the powerful prosper. It wants to know when justice will finally arrive and what it will look like when it does. These are not the questions of a man surveying the architecture of heaven. These are the questions of a community under pressure, a people watching the wicked flourish and the faithful grind through lives of persecution and poverty, and wondering with an urgency that bleeds through every line whether God has noticed, whether God cares, whether the silence from heaven is indifference or patience. The first parable begins with a vision of the coming judgment, and the central image is the dwelling place of the righteous in the presence of the angels. Enoch sees the homes that have been prepared for the holy ones, the spaces set aside in heaven for those who have endured the cruelties of the present age, and the vision is suffused with a tenderness that suggests the author knew personally and painfully what it meant to need reassurance that suffering has a limit and faithfulness has a reward. The righteous will dwell under the wings of the Lord of spirits, a title for God that appears throughout the parables and nowhere else in one Enoch, a name that emphasizes not power or judgment, but sovereignty over the spiritual realm, dominion over the hosts of heaven, intimacy with the invisible world that lies behind the visible one. Under the wings of the Lord of spirits, the righteous will be clothed in garments of glory, garments of life, and those garments will never wear out, and their glory will never pass away. But the comfort of the righteous is only half the vision. The other half concerns the fate of the mighty, and the Book of Parables reserves for them a fury so controlled, so meticulously articulated, that it reads less like anger and more like a legal sentence being delivered by a judge who has reviewed every piece of evidence and found the defendant guilty on every count. The kings of the earth, the text says, the mighty and the exalted, and those who rule the land, will see the elect one sitting on the throne of glory, and they will be terrified. Pain will seize them, like the pain of a woman in labor, and they will look at one another with stricken faces, and they will cast down their faces and be troubled. And pain will seize them when they see the Son of Man sitting on the throne of his glory. The kings and the mighty and the exalted and those who possess the land will bless and glorify and exalt the one who rules over all things, who has been hidden, because from the beginning the Son of Man was hidden, and the Most High preserved him in the presence of his might, and revealed him to the elect. The language here requires careful attention, because it is doing something that had never been done before in Jewish messianic thought, at least not with this degree of explicitness. The figure on the throne, the one called the Son of Man, the elect one, did not recently come into existence. He was not born at a particular moment in history. He was not chosen from among the nations, or anointed by a prophet, or raised up from a particular tribe. He was hidden. He was preserved. He was with God before the creation of the world, before the sun and the stars were set in their courses, before the foundations of the earth were laid. The Son of Man, in the theology of the Book of Parables, is a pre-existent being, a figure who exists outside of time, who was named before the heavens were made, and who has been kept in reserve, concealed in the presence of the Most High, waiting for the moment when the suffering of the righteous reaches its fullness and the time comes for him to be revealed. This is a staggering claim. Pre-existence, in the theological vocabulary of the ancient world, was not a quality attributed lightly. To say that a being existed before the creation of the world was to place that being in a category shared only by God and by the primal elements of the cosmos, by wisdom, perhaps. The divine attribute personified in Proverbs chapter 8, who declares that she was brought forth before the mountains, before the hills, before the earth was made. The Book of Parables is making an analogous claim about the Son of Man. He is not merely a future king. He is not merely a promised deliverer. He is a cosmic figure, older than the stars, hidden in the presence of God, and his eventual revelation will not be a political event or a military campaign. It will be an apocalypse in the original sense of the word, an unveiling, a pulling back of the curtain, a sudden and catastrophic disclosure of something that has been there all along, invisible, patient, waiting. The second parable expands the vision and deepens its intensity. Enoch sees the head of days, a figure whose white hair is like pure wool and whose garment is indescribable, and with him is another being, a figure whose countenance has the appearance of a man, and his face is full of graciousness, like one of the holy angels. Enoch asks the angel who accompanies him who this figure is, and the angel's answer is the theological centerpiece of the entire book of parables. This is the Son of Man who has righteousness, with whom righteousness dwells, and who reveals all the treasures of that which is hidden, because the Lord of spirits has chosen him, and whose lot has the preeminence before the Lord of spirits in uprightness forever. The Son of Man has righteousness. Righteousness dwells with him. The phrasing is not incidental. In a text obsessed with the question of why the righteous suffer and the wicked prosper, the assertion that righteousness itself has a home, a permanent address, a figure in whom it resides without wavering, is an answer to the deepest anxiety of the community that produced this text. Righteousness has not been abandoned. It has not been defeated. It has not been rendered irrelevant by the apparent triumph of the powerful. It has been preserved, hidden, kept safe in the person of the Son of Man, who has held it in trust since before the beginning of time, and who will, when the moment comes, exercise it with a completeness that will leave no corner of creation untouched. And then comes the judgment. The judgment scenes in the Book of Parables are among the most vivid in all of apocalyptic literature, and they are written with a specificity that suggests the authors had particular oppressors in mind, particular regimes whose cruelty they had personally endured, particular kings and governors and landlords whose faces they could see when they closed their eyes and imagined the day of reckoning. The Son of Man sits on the throne of glory, and before him are brought the kings and the mighty and the exalted and those who possess the land. These are not abstract categories. These are the people who control the world, who own the fields and the vinting presses and the mills, who levy taxes and conscript armies and live in palaces built on the labor of those who will never enter their gates. And the Son of Man looks at them, and they are found wanting, and the text describes what happens next with a precision that borders on the surgical. Their faces will be filled with darkness and shame. They will be delivered to the angels of punishment, and the angels will take them and requite them for the evil they have done to the children and the elect of the Lord of spirits. They will become a spectacle to the righteous and to the elect, who will rejoice over them, because the wrath of the Lord of spirits rests upon them, and his sword is drunk with their blood. The righteous and the elect will be saved on that day, and they will never again see the face of the sinners and the unrighteous. The emotional temperature of these passages is almost unbearable if you read them the way their original audience would have read them, as the fantasies of the powerless. As the desperate hopes of people who had been ground down by occupying armies and corrupt tax collectors and brutal local authorities, and who had no recourse, no court of appeal, and no mechanism for justice in the present world. The Book of Parables gave them a mechanism. It gave them a courtroom. It gave them a judge who could not be bribed, and a verdict that could not be overturned, and a sentence that would be carried out with the full weight of cosmic authority behind it. The Son of Man was their answer to every unanswered prayer, every unpunished crime, every moment of injustice that had gone unwitnessed by anyone who had the power to act. Someone had witnessed. Someone had recorded. Someone was coming to set it right. But the Book of Parables does not limit the Son of Man's judgment to earthly oppressors. His authority extends to the spiritual realm as well. Azazel and his hosts are named. The fallen angels, already bound, already imprisoned, are brought before the elect one for final sentencing. The kings of the earth and the angels of corruption are judged by the same figure, in the same courtroom, under the same standard. The message is clear, and it is radical. The Son of Man's jurisdiction is total. He judges the human and the angelic, the visible and the invisible, the living and the dead. No being in creation is exempt from his authority. No power, whether terrestrial or celestial, whether clothed in flesh or wrapped in fire, can resist his verdict. And then the text introduces a concept that would become one of the most important ideas in the history of religious thought: the resurrection of the dead. The earth, the Book of Parables declares, will give back that which has been entrusted to it, and Sheol will give back that which it has received, and hell will give back that which it owes. The dead will rise, not merely the spirits, not merely the shades, not merely the diminished echoes of the living that populate the underworld in earlier Jewish thought, but the dead themselves, restored, embodied, returned to a fullness of existence that death had taken from them, and the elect one will choose among them. He will separate the righteous from the sinners, the faithful from the apostate, the ones who endured from the ones who capitulated, and the separation will be permanent, final, irrevocable. The righteous, once resurrected, will be transformed. The text describes this transformation with an imagery that is both beautiful and strange. They will wear garments of glory. They will become angels, or something very like angels, beings of light and power and immortality, who will dwell in the presence of the Lord of spirits forever. The suffering they endured on earth will not merely be compensated. It will be transmuted. It will become the raw material of their exaltation, the very thing that qualifies them for the glory they now receive. The logic is precise, and it is merciless in its hope. The worse things were, the better they will be. The deeper the valley, the higher the mountain on the other side. And the Son of Man, who was hidden before the creation of the world, who waited through all the long centuries of human suffering, who watched from his concealment as the righteous were persecuted and the wicked prospered, will be the one who hands them their new garments and leads them into the light. Now, throughout these visions, the title Son of Man is used with a consistency and a weight that demands examination. The phrase itself has a long history in the Hebrew Bible. In Ezekiel, God addresses the prophet as Son of Man over 90 times, using it as a form of address that emphasizes the prophet's humanity, his mortality, his creaturely smallness in the presence of the divine. In the book of Daniel, chapter 7, the phrase takes on a very different quality. Daniel sees in his vision one like a son of man coming with the clouds of heaven, approaching the Ancient of Days, and being given dominion and glory and a kingdom that shall not be destroyed. The Danielic Son of Man is a heavenly figure, a being who comes from the realm of God to receive authority over all nations and peoples and languages. The Book of Parables takes the Danielic vision and goes further, much further. In Daniel, the one like a son of man appears in a single vision, receives his authority, and is not described in detail. In the Book of Parables, the Son of Man is a fully developed character. He has attributes. He has a history, a pre-existence, a name that was spoken before time began. He has a function: to judge, to vindicate, to separate, to rule. He has a relationship with the righteous. He is their champion, their advocate, the one who has been kept in reserve specifically for the purpose of delivering them from the oppression they endure. And he has a relationship with God, the head of days, that the text describes in terms of extraordinary intimacy. The Son of Man stands before the head of days. The Son of Man is chosen by the Lord of spirits. The Son of Man's lot has preeminence before the Lord of spirits in uprightness forever. He is not God, but he is closer to God than any other being in creation, and the authority he exercises is not delegated reluctantly. It is conferred with a fullness that suggests the authority was always meant to be his, that the throne of glory was built for him before the first star was kindled. The title Elect One adds another dimension. To be elected, in the theological vocabulary of Second Temple Judaism, is to be chosen, singled out, marked for a particular purpose by the will of God. Israel is the elect nation. David is the elect king. The servant of Isaiah chapter 42 is the elect one in whom God's soul delights. By applying this title to the same figure who is called the Son of Man, the Book of Parables is weaving together multiple strands of Jewish messianic expectation into a single figure who is simultaneously the heavenly being of Daniel's vision and the chosen servant of Isaiah's prophecy, and the pre-existent embodiment of righteousness that the community of the faithful has been waiting for since the world went wrong. The elect one is not one Messiah among several possible candidates. He is the convergence of all messianic hopes into a single point, the figure in whom every promise and every prophecy and every desperate prayer finds its answer. And then, in the final chapters of the Book of Parables, something happens that has bewildered readers and scholars for centuries. Enoch, the visionary, the scribe, the man who has been shown all of these things, is himself identified with the Son of Man. The passage is extraordinary, and it deserves to be read slowly. In chapter 71, Enoch is taken up into the heaven of heavens, and his spirit is translated, and he is among the inhabitants of the heavens. And the head of days comes with Michael and Gabriel and Raphael and Phanuel and thousands and 10,000s of angels without number. And the head of days comes to Enoch, and the angel of peace says to him, "You are the Son of Man who was born for righteousness, and righteousness has dwelt on you, and the righteousness of the head of days will not forsake you. You are the Son of Man, the mortal patriarch, the seventh from Adam, the man who walked with God and was not because God took him, is told that he is the pre-existent figure who will judge the kings of the earth and vindicate the righteous and sit on the throne of glory." The human being who has spent the entire book of parables watching visions of the Son of Man, asking angels to explain who this figure is, marveling at his power and his authority and his righteousness, discovers at the end that he was looking at himself, or rather, at what he was always meant to become, at what he was before the world was made and will be again when the world is remade. The walk with God that Genesis described in 7 words has turned out to be something far stranger and far more consequential than anyone could have guessed. Enoch did not merely walk with God. He was, in some sense, that the text strains to articulate, but never quite makes fully explicit, a divine figure walking temporarily in human form, a being of cosmic significance, wearing the garments of mortality until the appointed time. Whether this identification was part of the original composition or a later addition, whether it was intended literally or as a kind of mystical metaphor for the exaltation of the righteous, whether it reflects a genuine tradition about Enoch or an author's audacious theological improvisation, these questions have been debated for generations and will be debated for generations more. What is beyond debate is the effect. The identification of Enoch with the Son of Man created a figure of unparalleled stature in the religious imagination of the late Second Temple period. A human being who was also a cosmic judge, a patriarch who was also a pre-existent divine being, a mortal who was also the one appointed to determine the fate of all mortals. The categories that the Book of the Watchers had insisted must remain separate: the divine and the human, the angelic and the mortal, the eternal and the temporal, were suddenly, vertiginously collapsed in a single figure who was both at once. And now the question that has haunted scholars since the Book of Parables was first read by modern eyes: what is the relationship between the Son of Man in one Enoch and the Son of Man in the Gospels? The parallels are too numerous and too precise to be dismissed as coincidence. In the Gospels, Jesus refers to himself as the Son of Man more than 80 times. He speaks of the Son of Man coming on the clouds of heaven. He speaks of the Son of Man sitting on the throne of glory. He speaks of the Son of Man judging the nations, separating the sheep from the goats, consigning the wicked to eternal punishment and welcoming the righteous into eternal life. He speaks of the Son of Man who must suffer and be rejected and killed and rise again. The language, the imagery, and the theology of the Son of Man in the Gospels overlap with the language, the imagery, and the theology of the Son of Man in the Book of Parables to a degree that cannot be explained by coincidence and that demand explanation. The explanation most widely accepted among scholars is not that the Gospels borrowed directly from the Book of Parables, though some scholars have argued precisely that, but rather that both texts drew upon a common pool of messianic expectation that was circulating in Jewish communities during the first century before and after the Common Era. The idea of a pre-existent, heavenly, judging Son of Man was, as the Book of Parables demonstrates, not a Christian invention. It was a Jewish idea, developed within Jewish communities, articulated in Jewish texts, and rooted in Jewish readings of the Book of Daniel, and the prophecies of Isaiah, and the traditions surrounding the figure of Enoch. When the early followers of Jesus reached for a title to describe who they believed their teacher was, they did not invent the Son of Man from nothing. They reached into a tradition that already existed, a tradition that was already rich and complex and charged with eschatological meaning, and they applied it to the figure of Jesus with a boldness that would have been immediately recognizable to anyone familiar with the Enochic literature. This is why the Book of Parables has been so controversial, and why its dating has been the subject of such fierce scholarly dispute. If the Book of Parables predates the Gospels, then the Son of Man theology that Christianity has always claimed as its distinctive contribution to religious thought was, in fact, a pre-existing Jewish theology that Christianity adapted and reinterpreted. If the Book of Parables is contemporary with the earliest Christian writings, then the question becomes one of mutual influence. Were the Enochic communities and the early Christian communities drawing on the same sources, developing the same ideas in parallel, arriving at similar conclusions from similar premises? And if the Book of Parables postdates the Gospels, which a small minority of scholars have argued, then the borrowing runs in the opposite direction, and the Enochic Son of Man is a Jewish response to the Christian Son of Man, a reclaiming of a figure that Christianity was in the process of appropriating. The absence of the Book of Parables from the Dead Sea Scrolls has been the single most powerful piece of evidence used by those who argue for a late date. Every other section of 1 Enoch is represented among the Qumran fragments. The Book of the Watchers is there. The Astronomical Book is there. The Book of Dream Visions is there. The Epistle of Enoch is there. But the Book of Parables is missing. Not a single fragment, not a single line. The silence is deafening, and it has been interpreted in radically different ways. Some scholars argue that the absence proves the Book of Parables was composed after the Qumran community ceased to exist, which would place it in the 1st century of the Common Era or later. Others argue that the absence is an accident of preservation, that the caves of Qumran contained only a fraction of the texts that circulated in Jewish communities during this period, and that the failure to find the parables does not prove they did not exist. Still, others have proposed that the Qumran community, which had its own distinctive messianic theology, may have deliberately excluded the Book of Parables because its Son of Man theology conflicted with their own expectations. The dating question may never be settled definitively. What can be said with confidence is that the Book of Parables represents a strand of Jewish messianic thought that was flourishing in or around the 1st century, a strand that produced a vision of cosmic judgment and divine vindication centered on a pre-existent figure called the Son of Man, and that this strand either influenced early Christianity directly or shared with early Christianity a common theological ancestry that makes the two traditions much closer cousins than the subsequent history of their rivalry might suggest. The Son of Man did not begin with Jesus. He may not even have begun with the Book of Parables. He began with Daniel, or perhaps with something older than Daniel, some deep current in Israelite thought that imagined a heavenly advocate, a figure who would one day appear at the right hand of God and put the world to rights. The Book of Parables gave that figure a name, a biography, a throne, and a judgment. The Gospels gave him a face and a cross. The theology of the Book of Parables extends beyond the Son of Man, though everything else revolves around him like planets around a sun. The text contains extended meditations on the nature of wisdom, on its hiddenness, on the way it sought a dwelling place among men and found none, and so returned to heaven and took her seat among the angels. This passage, in chapter 42, has been compared to the prologue of the Gospel of John, where the Word, the Logos, came to his own, and his own received him not. The structural parallel is unmistakable. Wisdom comes down. Wisdom is rejected. Wisdom returns to heaven. The Word comes down. The Word is rejected. The Word returns to the Father. Whether the fourth Gospel knew the Book of Parables, or whether both texts are expressing a common Jewish theological motif about the rejection of divine wisdom by a world that was not ready for it, the resonance is too deep to ignore. The parables also contain a vision of the springs of righteousness, inexhaustible fountains that will never run dry, surrounded by springs of wisdom, and all who thirst drink of them and are filled with wisdom, and their dwellings are with the righteous and the holy and the elect. The imagery is liquid, flowing, generous in a way that the punishment imagery is not. The punishments are sharp, angular, defined by boundaries and walls and chains. The rewards are boundless, overflowing, characterized by an abundance that spills over every container. The contrast is deliberate. The authors of the Book of Parables understood that hope must feel different from fear, that the promise of redemption must have a different texture than the threat of damnation, and they shaped their language accordingly. The punishments are architectural. The rewards are hydrological. Walls confine. Water liberates. The community of the righteous, as described in the parables, is not merely a group of individuals who happen to share a moral orientation. It is a body, a collective, a people who belong to the elect one the way servants belong to a household or subjects belong to a king. The Son of Man is their representative, their champion, their identity distilled into a single figure. When he sits on the throne of glory, they sit with him. When he judges the kings, he judges on their behalf. When he receives the kingdom, they receive it through him. The relationship between the elect one and the elect community is not incidental. It is constitutive. Neither fully exists without the other. The Son of Man needs the righteous the way a king needs a people, and the righteous need the Son of Man the way a people needs a king who will actually fight for them instead of exploiting them. This communal dimension of the parables helps explain why the text resonated so powerfully in the early centuries of both Judaism and Christianity. It spoke to communities, not just to individuals. It addressed the suffering of peoples, not just the anxiety of souls. It offered a vision of cosmic justice that was not merely personal but political, not merely spiritual but material. The kings would be brought down. The mighty would be humbled. The land would be redistributed. The righteous, who had been pushed to the margins of the world by the violence of the powerful, would be brought to the center, placed under the wings of the Lord of Spirits, clothed in garments that would never wear out, and given access to springs that would never run dry. The revolution the book of parables envisions is total. It is not a reform. It is not an adjustment. It is the complete inversion of the existing order, the pulling down of every power structure that human history has ever produced, and the establishment of a new order founded on the righteousness that the Son of Man has held in trust since before the stars were kindled. The book of parables ends, after the identification of Enoch with the Son of Man, with a note that is almost offhand in its enormity. Enoch is taken up. He is removed from the earth. He does not return. The man who walked with God has walked so far that he has walked out of the human story entirely, translated from mortality into something else, something the text cannot quite name, but that the identification with the Son of Man makes clear. He is no longer merely a man. He is the eschatological judge. He is the pre-existent righteous one. He is the figure who will appear at the end of days to render the verdict that the earth has been waiting for since the first murder, the first lie, the first act of oppression committed by the strong against the weak. And the visions he carried, the ones about the throne and the judgment and the springs of wisdom and the garments of glory, would not die with him. They would pour into the stream of Jewish apocalyptic thought and travel downstream into Christianity, and from Christianity into the wider world, shaping ideas about justice and judgment and the nature of the Messiah that are still, 2,000 years later, alive and in motion and impossible to contain. But the book of parables was not the only section of one Enoch that altered the way human beings understood the cosmos. Running alongside the visions of judgment and salvation, woven into the same anthology, but operating according to an entirely different logic, was a text concerned not with the moral order of the universe, but with its mechanical order, not with the meaning of history, but with the meaning of time itself, not with who would judge the world, but with how the world kept time, and whether the calendar humanity used to mark its days and its festivals and its worship was true or false, sacred or corrupted, faithful to the design of heaven, or a deviation that offended the very God who set the luminaries in their courses. Running alongside the visions of judgment and salvation, woven into the same anthology, but operating according to an entirely different logic, was a text concerned not with the moral order of the universe, but with its mechanical order, not with the meaning of history, but with the meaning of time itself, not with who would judge the world, but with how the world kept time, and whether the calendar humanity used to mark its days and its festivals and its worship was true or false, sacred or corrupted, faithful to the design of heaven, or a deviation that offended the very God who set the luminaries in their courses. The Astronomical Book, occupying chapters 72 through 82 of 1 Enoch, is the oldest section of the entire anthology. It is almost certainly older than the Book of the Watchers. Fragments found among the Dead Sea Scrolls suggest that the Aramaic original ran to a length far exceeding what survives in the Gaze translation, perhaps 4 times longer, a sprawling, obsessively detailed treatise on the movements of the sun, the moon, the stars, and the winds, composed at a time when the question of how to measure the year was not an academic matter but a crisis of faith. And to understand why a treatise on astronomy could be a crisis of faith, you have to understand what a calendar meant in the ancient world, and why getting it wrong was not merely inconvenient, but, in the eyes of certain communities, catastrophic. A calendar is not a neutral technology. It never has been. A calendar determines when you plant and when you harvest, when you feast and when you fast, when you work and when you rest. In a society governed by religious law, a calendar determines something even more fundamental: when you worship. The festivals of ancient Israel, Passover, Shavuot, Sukkot, the Day of Atonement, were tied to specific dates, and those dates were not arbitrary. They were, in the theology of the Torah, appointed by God Himself. The festivals were called Moadim, appointed times, times that God had set apart for encounter between the human and the divine. To celebrate a festival on the wrong day was not a scheduling error. It was a missed appointment with the Creator of the universe. It was showing up at the wrong time to meet a king, and finding the throne room empty, and not understanding why. The question that tore at certain Jewish communities in the centuries before the Common Era was deceptively simple. Does the year have 364 days or 354? The difference sounds trivial. 10 days, less than 2 weeks. But the implications were seismic, because the answer determined which calendar you followed, and which calendar you followed determined when you observed the festivals, and when you observed the festivals determined whether your worship was acceptable to God or an offense to Him. The lunar calendar, which would eventually become the standard calendar of Rabbinic Judaism, and which remains the Jewish liturgical calendar to this day, is based on the cycles of the moon. A lunar month lasts approximately 29.5 days. 12 lunar months produce a year of roughly 354 days, which is 11 days shorter than the solar year. To keep the lunar calendar aligned with the seasons, an extra month must be added periodically, a process called intercalation, which introduces a 13th month into certain years and ensures that Passover always falls in the spring and Sukkot always falls in the autumn. The system works, but it is messy. It requires human intervention. It requires calculation, adjustment, the exercise of rabbinic or priestly authority to determine when the extra month should be added. And for certain communities in the Second Temple period, that messiness was the problem. A calendar that required human beings to tinker with it, to add and subtract, to make judgment calls about when to intercalate and when not to, was a calendar that had been corrupted by human hands. It was not the calendar that God had established at creation. It was a substitute, a compromise, a deviation from the sacred pattern that had been woven into the fabric of the cosmos when the luminaries were first set in their courses. The Astronomical Book argues, with a conviction that borders on ferocity, that the true calendar is solar. The year has 364 days, not approximately, not roughly, exactly. 364. The number is divisible by 7, which means that every year begins on the same day of the week. The festivals always fall on the same days. The system is perfect, self-contained, requiring no human intervention, no intercalation, no priestly calculations. It is, the Astronomical Book insists, the calendar of heaven itself, the calendar by which the angels reckon time, the calendar that God inscribed in the movements of the sun when he created the luminaries on the fourth day. To follow any other calendar is to break faith with the divine order. To observe the festivals according to the moon instead of the sun is to worship on the wrong days, to miss the appointed times, to profane the very structure of sacred time that God built into the cosmos as a gift to the faithful. The passion behind this argument is not intellectual. It is existential. The communities that produced and preserved the Astronomical Book believed that the Jerusalem temple establishment, the priestly aristocracy that controlled the worship of Israel, had adopted the wrong calendar. They believed that the festivals being celebrated in the holiest place on earth were being celebrated on the wrong days. They believed that the sacrifices being offered on the altar of the Lord were being offered at the wrong times. And they believed that this error was not innocent, it was a betrayal. It was the religious leadership of Israel abandoning the calendar that God himself had ordained and substituting a human invention, a lunar calendar that required constant adjustment and that therefore placed human authority above divine design. The Astronomical Book is not a detached scientific treatise. It is a polemic. It is an argument for the restoration of a sacred order that its authors believed had been corrupted by the very people responsible for maintaining it. The text itself is narrated by Enoch, who receives his astronomical instruction from the angel Uriel, and the choice of Uriel as guide is significant. Uriel's name means light of God or fire of God, and throughout the Enochic literature he is associated with the luminaries, with the celestial bodies that govern the passage of time. He is, in effect, the angel in charge of the clock, the being responsible for ensuring that the sun rises at the correct time, that the moon follows its appointed path, that the stars mark the seasons as they were designed to mark them. When Uriel teaches Enoch the laws of the heavenly bodies, he is not sharing personal observations. He is transmitting the operational manual of the cosmos, the engineering specifications that God laid down at creation and that have governed the movements of the luminaries ever since. The solar system, as the Astronomical Book describes it, is governed by a structure of extraordinary elegance. 12 gates, 6 in the east and 6 in the west, through which the sun enters and exits the sky each day. The gates are not metaphors. They are architectural features of the heavens, openings in the firmament through which the great luminary passes on its daily journey from horizon to horizon. Each gate corresponds to a specific period of the year, and the sun's movement from gate to gate determines the length of the days and the nights, the coming and going of the seasons, and the structure of the year. In the first month of the year, the sun rises through the 4th gate in the east. The days are long, and the nights are short, and the ratio between them is precise. The daylight portion consists of 10 parts, and the night portion consists of 8 parts. Uriel explains these ratios to Enoch with the patience of a master teaching a student who must get every number right, because the numbers are not approximations, they are revelations. Each ratio reflects the will of God expressed in mathematical form. The length of the day is not an accident of orbital mechanics. It is a decision, a divine allocation of light and darkness that carries moral as well as physical significance. When the days are long, it is because God has decreed more light. When the nights are long, it is because God has decreed more darkness. The balance shifts across the year according to a pattern that is fixed, immutable, and knowable. And to know that pattern is to know something about the mind of the one who established it. As the months progress, the sun moves from gate to gate, and the ratios change. In the 3rd month, the sun rises through the 6th gate, the outermost gate, and the day reaches its greatest length, 12 parts of light to 6 parts of darkness. This is the summer solstice, though the Astronomical Book does not use that term. It describes it instead as the moment when the sun has completed its outward journey and begins to turn back, retracing its path through the gates, shortening the days and lengthening the nights until it reaches the 1st gate, the innermost gate, where the day is at its shortest and the night at its longest. Then it turns again, and the cycle repeats, and has repeated, and will repeat, forever, because the pattern is not subject to decay or deviation. It is the law of the cosmos, and the cosmos obeys. The moon receives a treatment that is, if anything, even more detailed. And the Astronomical Book's description of the lunar cycle is one of the most technically ambitious passages in any ancient text. Uriel shows Enoch how the moon's light waxes and wanes across the month, and the text tracks this process day by day, measuring the moon's illumination in 14ths, a unit that allows the authors to describe the gradual increase from new moon to full moon, and the gradual decrease from full moon back to darkness, with a precision that suggests actual observation, actual measurement, actual engagement with the night sky as a source of data as well as wonder. But the Astronomical Book's treatment of the moon is not merely descriptive, it is corrective. The text goes to considerable lengths to establish that the moon is subordinate to the sun. The moon borrows its light. The moon follows the sun through the gates. The moon's cycle is shorter than the sun's cycle, and the difference between the two, approximately 11 days per year, is the precise gap that the lunar calendar must fill with intercalation, the very process that the Astronomical Book considers a corruption of the divine design. The sun is the primary luminary. The sun determines the year. The sun governs the festivals. The moon is secondary and derivative, a reflector rather than a source, and any calendar that takes its primary measure from the moon rather than the sun has inverted the hierarchy that God established at creation. The insistence on solar supremacy is not merely astronomical, it is theological. In the ancient Near East, lunar calendars were associated with Babylonian culture, with the great empires of Mesopotamia that had dominated Israel for centuries, that had destroyed the temple, that had carried the people into exile, and that continued to exert cultural influence long after the political domination had ended. To adopt a lunar calendar was, in the eyes of the communities that produced the Astronomical Book, to adopt a Babylonian innovation, to subordinate Israelite worship to a foreign reckoning of time, to allow the patterns of empire to overwrite the patterns of creation. The solar calendar was older. The solar calendar was purer. The solar calendar was the one that God himself had encoded in the movements of the great luminary, and the faithful were obligated to follow it, regardless of what the temple establishment in Jerusalem decreed. This polemical dimension helps explain why the Astronomical Book was preserved and treasured by communities that stood in opposition to the Jerusalem priestly hierarchy. The Qumran community, the group responsible for the Dead Sea Scrolls, followed a solar calendar of 364 days, and the Astronomical Book was one of the texts they copied and studied with the greatest care. For them, the calendar question was not peripheral, it was central. It was the issue that separated the faithful from the apostate, the true Israel from the compromised Israel, the community of light from the community of darkness. To follow the lunar calendar of the temple was to participate in a system of worship that was, in their eyes, fundamentally invalid, no matter how splendid the temple might be, no matter how ancient its traditions, no matter how many thousands of pilgrims streamed through its gates at festival time. If the festivals were being observed on the wrong days, then the entire sacrificial system was misfiring. The incense was rising at the wrong hour. The blood was being poured at the wrong moment. The appointed times were being missed, systematically, year after year, and the God who had appointed those times was being insulted by the very institution that claimed to serve him. The Astronomical Book extends its concern with order beyond the sun and moon to the stars and the winds. Uriel shows Enoch the leaders of the stars, the great constellations that govern the seasons, and each star has a name, and each name has a function, and each function has been assigned by God. The stars do not wander. They do not choose their paths. They follow courses that were laid down at creation with the same precision that governs the sun's movement through the gates. The concept of a star transgressing its commandment, which appeared in the Book of the Watchers as a moral violation punishable by imprisonment, finds its technical explanation here in the Astronomical Book's insistence that every celestial body has been given a specific trajectory and a specific schedule, and that deviation from either is not merely an irregularity, but an act of cosmic disobedience. The winds, too, are subject to law. The Astronomical Book describes 12 portals from which the winds emerge, 3 for each cardinal direction, and each portal releases a specific type of wind with specific characteristics. From the east come winds of prosperity and dew and rain and blessing. From the south come drought and desolation and heat. From the west come rain and dew and locusts. From the north come cold and snow and frost and ice. The catalogue is exhaustive, and its purpose is the same as the catalogue of gates and luminaries, to demonstrate that nothing in the natural world is random. Every breeze, every storm, every shift in temperature is administered. The weather is not chaos, it is liturgy. The winds are not wild, they are obedient. They emerge from their appointed portals at their appointed times and carry out their appointed functions. And the fact that human beings experience them as unpredictable reflects not the nature of the winds, but the limitations of human perception. Enoch is told to write all of this down, and the command to write is itself significant. The Astronomical Book is presented not merely as a vision to be experienced, but as a body of knowledge to be transmitted. Enoch is to leave this information for future generations, for the righteous who will come after him, so that they will know the true structure of time and will not be led astray by those who reckon the year incorrectly. The text explicitly condemns those who will not reckon them in the computation of the year, those who will err therein, and who will not observe them according to his command. The language is sharp. It is accusatory. The people who follow the wrong calendar are not merely mistaken, they are sinners. They are disobedient. They have looked at the heavens and drawn the wrong conclusions. Or, worse, they have looked at the heavens and drawn the right conclusions, but have chosen to follow a different reckoning for reasons of political convenience or cultural conformity. The text acknowledges, in its final chapters, that the order it describes will not last forever in its current perfection. In the days of the sinners, the years will grow shorter, and the seasons will come too early or too late, and the moon will alter its order and not appear at its time. The cosmos itself, the great machine that Uriel has shown Enoch in such loving detail, will begin to malfunction, and the malfunction will not be mechanical, it will be moral. The sins of humanity will affect the heavens. The corruption of the earth will ripple upward into the celestial sphere. The stars will err in their courses. The moon will betray its schedule. The rain will be withheld at the wrong times and released at the wrong times. The natural order will reflect the moral disorder of the beings who live beneath it, because in the cosmology of the Astronomical Book, there is no distinction between natural law and moral law. They are the same law, expressed in different registers, and when one is violated, the other suffers. This idea, that human sin has cosmic consequences, that the behavior of human beings on earth can cause disruptions in the movements of the stars and the patterns of the weather, is one of the most distinctive and most underappreciated contributions of the Enochic literature to the history of religious thought. It anticipates, by many centuries, the ecological theologies of the modern era. The growing sense that the natural world and the moral world are not separate systems, but interconnected dimensions of a single reality, and that what humanity does to one inevitably affects the other. The Astronomical Book would not have been surprised by climate change. It would have expected it. It would have seen it as the inevitable consequence of a world that had departed from the pattern God established at creation, a world that had adopted the wrong calendar and observed the wrong festivals and lost touch with the rhythms that were supposed to govern not just worship, but the very turning of the seasons. The emotional heart of the Astronomical Book, beneath all the ratios and the gate numbers and the wind catalogues, is grief. Grief for a world that has lost its way. Grief for a temple that worships on the wrong days. Grief for a cosmos that was designed to run with the precision of a divine clock, and that is being thrown off its rhythm by the sins of the creatures who live on the small, fragile planet at its center. Uriel shows Enoch the beauty of the system, the elegance of the gates and the luminaries, and the perfectly balanced ratios of light and darkness. And the beauty is heartbreaking precisely because it is being wasted. The machine is perfect. The operators are not. The calendar is sacred. The people who should be following it have abandoned it. And the result is a world in which time itself has been profaned, in which the most basic unit of religious life, the day on which you worship, has been corrupted by human error, or human stubbornness, or human capitulation to the customs of foreign empires. Enoch records it all. He writes down the gates and the ratios, and the names of the stars and the courses of the winds, and he passes this knowledge to his son Methuselah, who will pass it to his descendants, who will carry it through the flood and into the new world, where, the text implies, without quite stating, it will be needed more than ever. Because the flood will cleanse the earth of the Nephilim and the violence and the blood, but it will not cleanse the heavens of their laws. The sun will still rise through its gates. The moon will still wax and wane in 14ths. The year will still have 364 days. And the question of whether humanity chooses to honor that structure or to ignore it will remain generation after generation, as long as the luminaries continue their courses, and the winds emerge from their appointed portals, and the God who set it all in motion continues to watch, with the patience and the sorrow that only an infinite being can sustain, as his creatures fumble with the clock he built for them and cannot seem to read the time. The Astronomical Book, for all its technical density, for all its lists and ratios and catalogues, is ultimately a love letter to order. It is a hymn to the idea that the universe makes sense, that its mechanisms can be known, that its patterns can be trusted, and that fidelity to those patterns is not merely a scientific virtue, but a spiritual one. To know the calendar is to know the will of God expressed in the language of mathematics. To follow the calendar is to align your life with the rhythm of creation itself, to worship when the cosmos says worship, to rest when the cosmos says rest, to celebrate when the light is at its fullest, and to mourn when the darkness is at its deepest, because these are not arbitrary human customs. They are the pulse of the divine order, beating through the gates and the luminaries and the winds, audible to anyone who knows how to listen. Enoch knew how to listen. Uriel taught him. And the knowledge he carried back, the numbers and the ratios and the names, was not less sacred than the visions of the Son of Man, or the geography of heaven, or the story of the fallen angels. It was the same sacredness expressed in a different register, not in the language of myth or prophecy or moral judgment, but in the language of astronomy, of mathematics, of the careful, patient observation of the sky. The God who judges is the same God who counts. The God who punishes the watchers is the same God who set the sun on its course through the gates. And the obedience that the faithful owe to the moral law is the same obedience they owe to the calendar, because the calendar is the moral law written in light. And to break it is to break the same covenant that the watchers broke when they descended from their stations and walked into a world where they did not belong. But there was one more section of the anthology still to be reckoned with, one more layer of the Enochic vision that would take the longest view of all, sweeping from the creation of the world to the end of days in a single dizzying narrative told not in the language of astronomy or geography or even theology, but in the strangest and most daring language the authors of one Enoch ever employed, the language of animals. The Book of Dream Visions occupies chapters 83 through 90 of 1 Enoch, and it contains two visions that Enoch receives in his sleep before his marriage, before the birth of Methuselah, and before the catastrophe that would consume the antediluvian world. The first vision is brief, almost cursory, a nightmare in which Enoch sees the heavens thrown down and the earth swallowed by an abyss, and he wakes screaming and tells his grandfather Mahalalel what he has seen. And Mahalalel, hearing the description, weeps because he understands what his grandson has been shown. The earth is going to be destroyed. The flood is coming. And the vision is not a warning that might be averted. It is a preview of something that has already been decided, a sentence that has already been passed, a future that is already moving toward the present with the inevitability of water flowing downhill. But the second vision, the one that gives the Book of Dream Visions its place in the history of religious literature, is something else entirely. It is called the Animal Apocalypse, and it is one of the most audacious pieces of symbolic narrative ever committed to writing in the ancient world. In it, the entire history of the world, from the creation of Adam to the coming of the Messianic age, is told as a story about animals. Every human being, every nation, every patriarch, every prophet, every king, and every conqueror is represented by an animal, and the choice of animal is never random. It is always deliberate, always coded, always carrying a freight of meaning that the original audience would have recognized immediately and that modern readers can recover with patience and attention. Adam is a white bull. The image is startling in its simplicity. Not a lion, not an eagle, not a creature of power or predation, but a bull. Strong, patient, domestic, fertile, the animal that, in the ancient Near East, symbolized not kingship, but productivity, the capacity to work the land and to generate offspring. Adam is white because whiteness, in the symbolic vocabulary of this text, denotes purity, righteousness, proximity to the divine. He is the first white bull, and from him come other white bulls, his sons, his grandsons, the patriarchs of the antediluvian line, each one a bull of a particular color, each color carrying its own significance. Cain, the murderer, becomes a black bull. Abel, the innocent, is a red bull, red like the blood that was spilled. Seth, the replacement, the one through whom the righteous line continues, is a white bull like his father. The genealogy of Genesis chapter 5, which in its original form was a list of names and numbers, becomes in the Animal Apocalypse a herd of bulls moving across the landscape of time, and the reader can track the spiritual condition of the human race by watching the colors shift and change. The fallen angels enter the narrative not as bulls but as stars, and the choice is both poetically perfect and theologically precise. Stars are luminous. Stars are celestial. Stars occupy a station above the earth, looking down, watching. When the stars fall from heaven, when they descend to earth and mingle with the cattle, the visual is more disturbing than any description of angels taking human wives could ever be. because it translates the cosmic transgression into barnyard terms, into the grotesque image of celestial objects coupling with livestock, and the wrongness of the act becomes visceral, physical, impossible to intellectualize away. The offspring of these unions are not bulls. They are elephants, camels, and asses, creatures that are large and strange and do not belong in a herd of cattle, creatures whose very presence among the bulls and the heifers is a visible sign that something has gone terribly wrong with the order of creation. The elephants and the camels and the asses begin to attack the bulls, and the bulls begin to attack each other, and the earth descends into violence. And the symbolism tracks the narrative of the Book of the Watchers with remarkable fidelity, translating every element into the animal register. The cry of the earth becomes the lowing of cattle in distress. The archangels become four great white figures, angelic bulls perhaps, or beings beyond animal categorization, who descend to deal with the crisis. One of the stars, the leader of the fallen, is bound and cast into an abyss. The elephants and the camels and the asses are put to the sword. And then the flood comes, and the water covers everything, and the cattle drown, and the world is reduced to a single vessel carrying a single white bull and his family through the darkness. That white bull is Noah. And when the waters recede and the vessel comes to rest, and the animals emerge onto dry land, a new phase of the vision begins, and the symbolic language shifts in a way that is profoundly significant. Noah's sons are bulls, as their father was. But within a few generations, the bulls give way to a different animal. Abraham is still a white bull. Isaac is a white bull. Jacob is a white bull. But Jacob's 12 sons, the founders of the 12 tribes, are not bulls at all. They are sheep. The transformation from bull to sheep is the animal apocalypse's way of marking the most important transition in Israelite history, the shift from the patriarchal age to the national age, from the era of individuals and families to the era of a people. Bulls are solitary, powerful, self-sufficient. Sheep are communal, vulnerable, dependent on a shepherd. By turning Israel into sheep, the animal apocalypse is saying something profound about the nature of the covenant people. They are not mighty. They are not fearsome. They are small and fragile and easily scattered, and their survival depends not on their own strength, but on the quality of their shepherd. The entire history of Israel, from this point forward, will be a story about sheep, about their shepherds, about the wolves and lions and leopards that prey upon them, and about the God who watches from above and keeps count of every lamb that is lost. Egypt enters the vision as a pack of wolves, and the symbolism could not be more apt. Wolves are predators. Wolves hunt in groups. Wolves are clever and patient and methodical in the way they isolate and bring down their prey. The enslavement of Israel in Egypt becomes, in the animal apocalypse, the story of sheep trapped among wolves, and the terror is immediate and sensory in a way that the historical narrative sometimes is not, because everyone knows what wolves do to sheep, and the image requires no footnotes. Moses appears, and his depiction is one of the most remarkable in the entire vision. He is a sheep, like the rest of Israel, but a sheep who is transformed. The text says he became a man, not a bull, not an angel, a man. In a narrative where every other figure is an animal, Moses alone crosses the boundary between the symbolic and the literal, between the bestial and the human. He becomes something that the other sheep are not, a being who can speak with God directly, who can stand upright, who can lead. The transformation is temporary in a sense. Moses remains associated with the sheep, remains part of the flock, remains identified with the community he leads. But for a moment, for the duration of the Exodus and the giving of the law, he transcends the category that contains everyone else. He becomes a man among sheep, a shepherd who is himself a member of the flock. And the paradox is the point. Moses is Israel, and more than Israel at the same time, a leader who comes from the people, but who, in the moment of leadership, becomes something the people cannot follow. The Exodus itself is told in the compressed, vivid shorthand that characterizes the animal apocalypse at its best. The wolves pursue the sheep. The sea opens, the sheep pass through. The wolves follow and drown. The narrative is stripped of every detail that does not serve the symbolic purpose. Every speech and every miracle and every complaint and every rebellion reduced to the essentials: sheep running, wolves chasing, water parting, and then the wolves are gone, and the sheep are in the wilderness, and Moses is building them a house. The house is the tabernacle, the portable sanctuary that Israel carried through the desert. And in the animal apocalypse, it is described simply as a house built for the sheep, a place where they can gather, a structure that gives form and purpose to a flock that would otherwise be aimless. The entry into the promised land introduces new predators: the Canaanites, the Philistines, the Amalekites, the Midianites. All the nations that opposed Israel during the period of the Judges appear as dogs, wild boars, foxes, and hyenas. Each animal is chosen with care. Dogs are domestic animals, gone feral, creatures that live on the edges of human settlement and can be either companions or threats. Wild boars are destructive, rooting through the earth, tearing up crops, dangerous when cornered. Foxes are sly, elusive, difficult to catch. Hyenas are scavengers, feeding on the kills of others, patient and opportunistic. The enemies of Israel are not a monolithic force. They are a bestiary, a catalogue of threats, each with its own character and its own method of predation, and the sheep must navigate all of them. The judges and the early kings are sheep who rise above the flock, sheep who grow horns and can fight. Saul is a sheep. David is a sheep, a small sheep who grows a great horn. Solomon is a sheep who builds a tower, a great tower, and the tower is the temple, the permanent house of God in Jerusalem, the structure that replaced the portable tabernacle and became the center of Israelite worship. The construction of the temple is, in the animal apocalypse, the climax of Israel's early history, the moment when the sheep finally have a permanent home, a place that is not merely a shelter but a sacred space, a point of contact between the flock and the God who watches over them. But the tower does not hold. The kingdom divides. The sheep of the north and the sheep of the south split apart, and the predators return, and this time the predators are larger, more powerful, more systematic in their violence. The Assyrians appear as lions. The Babylonians appear as tigers, or perhaps leopards. The text is ambiguous, and the Ge'ez may be translating an Aramaic term that does not correspond exactly to any single modern animal. The eagles that appear later are almost certainly the Romans, or possibly the Ptolemaic and Seleucid empires, the great raptor powers that swooped down from above and carried the sheep away. The exile, the destruction of the first temple, the scattering of the tribes, all of it is rendered in the animal apocalypse as a catastrophe of predation. The lions and the leopards and the eagles tearing through the flock, scattering the sheep, pulling down the tower, burning the house that Solomon built. And it is here, at the moment of Israel's greatest vulnerability, that the animal apocalypse introduces its most provocative and most theologically daring concept, the 70 shepherds. After the destruction of the temple and the beginning of the exile, God hands the sheep over to 70 angelic shepherds and gives them a specific mandate. They are to tend the flock. They are to protect the sheep. They are to ensure that Israel survives its period of punishment and emerges on the other side. But God also tells the shepherds how many sheep they are permitted to allow to be destroyed, and the number is fixed, and the shepherds are not to exceed it. The mandate is precise. The limits are clear. The shepherds are given authority, but the authority is bounded, and the boundaries are non-negotiable. The 70 shepherds fail. They exceed their mandate. They allow more sheep to be destroyed than God authorized. They are negligent, corrupt, indifferent, or actively malicious, and the sheep suffer far more than God intended them to suffer. The nations of the earth, the predatory animals, tear through the flock with a savagery that goes beyond anything the divine plan required, and the shepherds either cannot or will not stop them. The sheep are slaughtered in numbers that exceed the divine quota, and the excess is not accidental. It is a crime. The shepherds have been entrusted with a sacred responsibility, and they have betrayed it, and the betrayal will be added to the reckoning that is coming. The theological implications of the 70 shepherds are staggering, because they imply that Israel's suffering during and after the exile was not entirely God's will. God intended punishment. God intended discipline. God intended a period of hardship that would purify the flock and prepare it for restoration. But the actual suffering that Israel experienced exceeded God's intention. The agents God appointed to administer the punishment went too far. They were too harsh. They allowed too many to die. And God noticed. God kept count. God recorded every sheep that was destroyed beyond the authorized number, and the shepherds who allowed it will be held accountable. This idea that God's instruments of judgment can themselves become guilty of excess, that the agents of divine punishment can overshoot their mandate and incur judgment themselves, is one of the most sophisticated theological moves in the entire Enochic corpus. It allows the authors to affirm simultaneously that Israel's suffering is divinely ordained, and that Israel's suffering is unjust. Both statements are true. God decreed the punishment, but the punishment was carried out with a cruelty that exceeded the decree. Israel deserved discipline, but Israel did not deserve what actually happened. The gap between what God intended and what the shepherds permitted is the space in which Israel's complaint against its own suffering becomes legitimate, becomes righteous, becomes something that God Himself acknowledges and will rectify. Throughout the period of the 70 shepherds, the animal apocalypse tracks the history of Israel with a specificity that allows scholars to identify the historical events behind each symbolic episode. The return from exile, the rebuilding of the second temple, described as a new house that is inferior to the first, whose bread is polluted and unclean, a detail that reveals the author's contempt for the second temple establishment and its compromised worship. The Persian period, the Hellenistic period, the rise of the Seleucid Empire and its persecution of the Jews, and then, in one of the most emotionally charged passages in the entire animal apocalypse, the Maccabean revolt. The Maccabees appear as lambs, not full-grown sheep, but lambs, young and small and seemingly helpless against the lions and the eagles and the wolves that surround them. But these lambs are different. These lambs grow horns. A great horn sprouts on one of the lambs, and this lamb, almost certainly Judas Maccabeus, begins to fight. The lamb with the great horn charges the predators and strikes them and gores them. And the predators are stunned, because lambs are not supposed to fight. Lambs are not supposed to have horns. Lambs are not supposed to be dangerous. But this lamb is dangerous, and the flock rallies behind it, and for a brief, exhilarating moment, the sheep push back against the animals that have been preying on them for centuries. The eagles and the vultures and the kites try to destroy the horned lamb and break his horn, and they do not succeed. The lamb cries out, and the other sheep hear and come to his aid, but their eyes are blinded. They cannot see clearly. They stumble and fall, and the horn cries out again and again. The passage is electric with frustration, with the agony of a leader who can see the path forward, but whose followers are too compromised, too damaged by centuries of predation and bad shepherding to follow him effectively. The Maccabean revolt, in the animal apocalypse's telling, is not a straightforward triumph. It is a partial victory achieved by extraordinary courage against overwhelming odds, hampered at every turn by the blindness and the weakness of the very community it is trying to save. And then God intervenes. The Lord of the sheep, the God who has been watching all of this from his high place, who has been counting the dead and recording the crimes of the shepherds, descends in wrath. The earth opens its mouth and swallows the predators. A great sword is given to the sheep, and they pursue their enemies, and the enemies fall before them. The 70 shepherds are brought to judgment, and they are found guilty. Guilty of every sheep they allowed to be destroyed beyond the mandate, guilty of every excess, every negligence, every act of cruelty that exceeded the punishment God had authorized. They are cast into an abyss of fire, the same fire that awaits the fallen stars, the same fire that awaits all those who transgressed the boundaries of their appointed stations. And the blinded sheep, the ones who could not see, the ones who stumbled and failed during the revolt, they too are judged, and they too are cast into the abyss, because blindness, in the moral universe of the animal apocalypse, is not an excuse. It is a choice. To not see what is plainly visible, to not recognize the horn when it sprouts, to not follow the lamb when he charges, is a form of disobedience as culpable as the disobedience of the shepherds or the transgression of the stars. After the judgment, the animal apocalypse reaches its climax, and the imagery shifts from violence to transformation. The old house, the second temple with its polluted bread and its compromised worship, is folded up and taken away. A new house is brought, a house larger and grander than the first, and it is set up in the same place, and all its pillars are new and its ornaments are new, and the Lord of the sheep dwells within it. All the sheep that survived are gathered into the new house, and all the beasts and all the birds of the earth come and bow down to the sheep and make petition to them and obey them. The vision has come full circle. The sheep, who were prey, who were scattered, who were blinded and slaughtered and abandoned by their shepherds, are now the rulers of the earth, and every creature that once preyed upon them now bows before them. And then the final transformation. A white bull is born, a great white bull, like the first white bull, like Adam at the beginning of the vision. And all the animals begin to change. Their forms shift. Their species dissolve. The sheep and the predators and the birds and the beasts all become white bulls, every one of them. And the first of those bulls, the great one, is a wild ox with great black horns, and the Lord of the sheep rejoices over him. The distinctions that have governed the entire narrative, the differences between sheep and wolves, between prey and predator, between the righteous and the wicked, are dissolved. The categories collapse. The original unity, the unity of the beginning, the unity of Adam, the white bull standing alone in a world without predators, is restored. The world ends as it began, with a single herd, a single species, a single color, a single condition, whiteness, purity, the absence of division. The white bull is the Messiah. The text does not use the word, but the symbol is unmistakable. He is a return to the beginning. He is a restoration of what was lost. He is the figure who comes at the end of time to undo everything that went wrong after the first white bull was corrupted, after the stars fell, after the sheep were scattered, after the shepherds failed. He does not conquer by force, though the judgment that precedes him is violent enough. He conquers by transformation. His presence changes the nature of every other being. In his proximity, Wolves become bulls. Eagles become bulls. The very predators who tore the flock apart are transfigured, remade, and returned to the original template. The Messiah, in the animal apocalypse, does not merely defeat evil. He eliminates the categories that made evil possible. He dissolves the distinction between predator and prey by turning everyone into the same thing, by restoring the unity that existed before the fall, before the corruption, before the long nightmare of history. The book of dream visions ends, and the epistle of Enoch begins, and the tone shifts once more from the visionary to the exhortatory, from the symbolic to the direct. The epistle occupies chapters 91 through 108, and it contains Enoch's final words to his children, his last testament, and his parting instructions to the generations that will come after him, and it reads like the speech of a man who has seen everything, who has walked through the machinery of the cosmos and the courtroom of God and the nightmare of history, and who now, at the end, wants to make sure that the people he is leaving behind understand what is at stake. The epistle opens with Enoch addressing his sons, calling them together, telling them to listen, telling them to love righteousness and walk in its paths. The language is tender, paternal, saturated with the urgency of a father who knows he is about to leave and who is not certain that his children understand the world they are inheriting. He tells them not to walk in the paths of darkness. He tells them that the paths of righteousness are worthy of acceptance, and the paths of unrighteousness will be destroyed and will vanish. He tells them that sinners will be delivered into the hands of the righteous, who will cut their throats and slay them mercilessly. The tenderness and the violence coexist in the same breath, because the epistle is not gentle. It cannot afford to be. The stakes are too high. The future is too dangerous. The generations that will come after Enoch will live in a world still haunted by the consequences of the Watcher's fall, still plagued by the spirits of the dead giants, still governed by corrupt shepherds and compromised calendars, and they will need not comfort but clarity. They will need to know with absolute precision what is right and what is wrong, what will save them and what will destroy them, and the epistle provides that knowledge with a bluntness that allows no room for equivocation. Embedded within the epistle is one of the most structurally ambitious compositions in the entire Enochic corpus, the Apocalypse of Weeks. In this passage, which scholars believe may have originally been an independent text later incorporated into the epistle, the entire history of the world is divided into 10 weeks, each week representing a period of sacred time, and the progress of history from creation to consummation is traced with a symbolic precision that mirrors the mathematical precision of the Astronomical Book. The first week is the week of Enoch himself, the week in which righteousness still endures, the week in which a man can walk with God and be taken by God and not die. The second week is the week of the great wickedness, the week in which the corruption spreads and the flood comes. The third week is the week of Abraham, the week in which a man is chosen, and from him a plant of righteous judgment grows. The fourth week is the week of the law, the week in which Moses receives the commandments, and the tabernacle is built, and a law for all generations is given. The fifth week is the week of the temple, the week in which the house of glory and dominion is built. The sixth week is the week of blindness, the week in which all who live in the temple become blind, and their hearts forsake wisdom, and a man ascends, and the house of dominion is burned, and the chosen root is dispersed. The sixth week is the exile, the destruction of the first temple, the scattering of Israel, rendered in a single compressed burst of symbolic language. The seventh week is the week of the apostate generation, the week in which a perverse generation arises, and its deeds are many, and all of them are wrong. But at its close, The elect righteous are chosen from the eternal plant of righteousness, to whom is given sevenfold instruction concerning all of creation. This is the moment of hope, the turning point, the instant when the community of the faithful receives the knowledge it needs to survive and to resist. The 8th week is the week of righteousness, in which a sword is given to the righteous, and sinners are delivered into their hands, and a house is built for the great King in glory forever. The 9th week is the week in which the righteous judgment is revealed to the whole world, and all the works of the godless vanish from the earth, and the world is written down for destruction. And the 10th week, the final week, is the week of the eternal judgment, the judgment that is executed upon the watchers. And the first heaven departs and passes away, and a new heaven appears, and all the powers of the heavens shine sevenfold forever. The Apocalypse of Weeks is a compression of everything the Enochic literature has to say about history into a single crystalline structure. It takes the sprawling narrative of the animal apocalypse and distills it into 10 units, each one a capsule containing an entire epoch, and the effect is both clarifying and vertiginous. History has a shape. History has a plan. History is not a random sequence of events, but a narrative with a beginning, a middle, and an end. And the end is not annihilation, but transformation. A new heaven, a sevenfold light, an eternal judgment that resolves every unresolved injustice and vindicates every act of faithfulness that went unrewarded in its own time. The remainder of the epistle returns to the exhortatory mode, and Enoch's voice becomes, if anything, more urgent, more anguished, more desperate to be heard. He pronounces woes upon the sinners, woe upon woe, a litany of condemnation that reads like the prophetic oracles of Isaiah or Amos translated into the apocalyptic register. Woe to you who build your houses with the labor of others. Woe to you who acquire gold and silver unjustly. Woe to you who drink water from every fountain, for soon you will be consumed. Woe to you who lead astray the hearts of men. Woe to you mighty ones, you who possess power, who oppress the righteous, for the day of your destruction is coming. The woes are specific. They are aimed at landlords and merchants and rulers and priests, at the people who control the economic and religious life of the community, and who use that control to enrich themselves at the expense of the vulnerable. The epistle is not a generalized denunciation of sin. It is a targeted indictment of a particular social order, one in which the wealthy build houses with the labor of the poor, in which gold and silver are acquired through exploitation, in which religious authority is used to sanction injustice rather than to challenge it. The community that produced the epistle was a community that knew what oppression felt like, that had experienced it personally, that could name the specific mechanisms by which the powerful maintained their power and the specific ways in which those mechanisms destroyed the lives of the faithful. But alongside the woes, alongside the fury and the condemnation, the epistle offers something else: assurance. It tells the righteous not to be afraid. It tells them that their names are written in the books of the Holy One, that their reward is stored up in heaven, that their suffering has been recorded and will be compensated. It tells them to hope, to endure, to wait, because the judgment is certain and the vindication is coming, and the God who sees everything has not forgotten them, has not overlooked them, has not confused them with the wicked, or consigned them to the same fate. The righteous are known. They are counted. They are held in the memory of God with a precision that mirrors the precision with which the Astronomical Book maps the movement of the sun through its gates. Nothing is lost. Nothing is overlooked. Every act of faithfulness, every moment of suffering, every prayer uttered in the darkness by someone who was not sure anyone was listening, all of it has been recorded, and all of it will be repaid. The final chapters of the epistle contain fragments that some scholars call the birth of Noah. a brief narrative describing the miraculous circumstances of Noah's birth, in which the infant emerges from the womb with hair as white as wool and skin that glows with an unearthly light, and his father Lamech is so frightened by the child's appearance that he runs to his own father Methuselah and begs him to ask Enoch, who has already been taken up into heaven, whether this child is truly human or the offspring of an angel. The anxiety is understandable, given the watcher's recent activities. The world is full of hybrid children, full of monstrous offspring, and a baby who looks like an angel might well be one, and the consequences of raising such a child are too terrible to contemplate. Enoch sends word back from heaven. The child is Lamech's. The child is human. The child is the one who will survive the flood and plant the new world. But the whiteness of his hair and the light of his skin are signs of his righteousness, marks of his election, visible proof that this child has been chosen for a purpose that will not be fully understood until the waters rise. And with that, the epistle draws to its close, and 1 Enoch, as a complete anthology, reaches its end, and the voice of the patriarch who walked with God falls silent, or rather, falls into the particular kind of silence that is not absence but completion. Everything that needed to be said has been said. Every vision has been recorded. Every warning has been delivered. Every promise has been made. The fallen angels have been named and judged. The Nephilim have been destroyed, and their spirits identified as the source of the world's ongoing affliction. The cosmos has been mapped, from the throne of fire to the cornerstone of the earth. The calendar has been corrected. The history of Israel has been told in the language of bulls and sheep and wolves. The judgment has been described. The Messiah has been glimpsed, and the 10 weeks of sacred time have been laid out like a blueprint for the unfolding of divine purpose. What Enoch left behind, written in scrolls that would be copied and translated and debated and suppressed and rediscovered across 22 centuries and counting, was not merely a book. It was a complete alternative account of reality, an account in which the origin of evil is cosmic, not merely human, an account in which the calendar is sacred and its corruption is sin, an account in which the stars can disobey, and the earth can cry out, and the spirits of dead giants can haunt the living, and the man who walks with God can become the judge who sits on the throne of glory. An account in which history is not chaos, but architecture, not accident, but design, not a random accumulation of suffering and triumph, but a 10-week plan executed by a God who keeps count of every sheep, every star, every prayer, every crime. The man who was not, the man whom God took, the mortal who walked beside the immortal and stepped out of the world and into the fire and the crystal and the light. He left all of this for the generations that would follow him, for the communities that would read his words in Ethiopian monasteries on high plateaus under African skies, for the scholars who would piece together his Aramaic fragments from the caves above the Dead Sea, for the theologians who would argue about his Son of Man, and whether the title belonged to a Jewish patriarch, or a Galilean carpenter, or to some figure yet to come, who would fulfill what both traditions had glimpsed, but neither had fully grasped. For the readers who would come to his text cold, knowing nothing of its history, and find themselves standing, as Enoch once stood, at the threshold of a house made of fire and ice and light, trembling, overwhelmed, unable to look away, Enoch walked with God, and he was not, for God took him. 7 words, 22 centuries of echo, and the echo has not stopped.